Chapter 37. Fong Chinggeth seemed to have sensed something as she quickly turned around and saw his thoughtful gaze. Her heart skipped a beat as she hurriedly said, "Brother Murong, I was just impatient." Murong Yishuan smiled elegantly and said in a gentle voice, "It's already extremely rare for an ancient mythological beast to appear in our glorious Sun Country. What's more, we saw the divine light land and the mythological beast descend with our own eyes. Actually, there's no need to be too stubborn about whether we can obtain it or not. Everything depends on fate." Brother Murong is right. Chinggeth was just impatient. She recovered her usual calmness and gentleness as she looked at him with adoration. "Who obtained the mythological beast?" Suddenly, a voice filled with pressure came from the sky. That voice contained the aura of spiritual energy, and it clearly spread around the forest. Feeling the fluctuation of spiritual energy that was different from profound energy, the people standing at the edge of the hole were shocked. They all looked up and saw a middle-aged man standing on a flying instrument in midair. He stood with his hands behind his back as he looked down at the people below. The pressure of a powerhouse filled the air in an instant and shrouded everyone's body. Everyone only felt a heavy aura as if Mount Tai was pressing down on them. Their chests felt as if a large rock was pressing down on them, making them unable to breathe. Their legs faintly wanted to kneel under this strong pressure. Indeed, some people with lower cultivation couldn't withstand the pressure from above and knelt on the ground with a plop. The blood in their chests churned and blood flowed out from their mouths. Fong Chinggeth's forehead was also covered in cold sweat from that strong pressure. Her face was pale and her legs went soft. She was about to fall to the ground when Murong Yishuan helped her up. At the same time, he used profound energy to protect her heart meridian to prevent her blood from churning. "Senior, can you retract your pressure and allow this junior to speak in detail?" Murong Yishuan looked at the middle-aged man in midair. At this time, he noticed that there were a few people in midair. Some of them were on swords, some were riding on flying beasts and some were standing on flying instruments. What? The mythological beast disappeared. An old man at the side glanced down and frowned as he said to the middle-aged man who was releasing his pressure, "Retract your pressure and listen to what that brat has to say. Who obtained the mythological beast? Speak quickly." Perhaps it was because the old man had spoken or because Murong Yishuan was neither arrogant nor humble, but after the middle-aged man retracted his pressure, he said in a deep voice, "Speak what you know." Once the pressure dispersed, the people below felt as if a large rock pressing on their chests had been removed. They could finally breathe and recover. When facing such an expert, everyone below naturally didn't dare be disrespectful. Murong Yishuan cupped his hands and bowed towards the people above before saying, "Seniors, when this junior arrived here, there was already no divine beast. I don't know who obtained the divine beast. This junior is speaking the truth. If you don't believe me, you can ask the people over there. They were even one step ahead of us." He looked at the people from the other team. Those people had already panicked under the powerful pressure from above. Naturally, they didn't dare to hide anything. "Yes, yes, yes. When we came here, we didn't see the divine beast. We don't know where the divine beast went. If we got the divine beast, we wouldn't dare to deceive the venerables. 2. Even if he was given 100 guts, he wouldn't dare to deceive a cultivator." Chapter 38. This junior is Murong Yishuan. His voice was gentle as he spoke neither softly nor slowly. "So it's the third prince of glorious Sun Country. No wonder you have such a bearing." The middle-aged man nodded and withdrew his gaze to look at the people beside him. He smiled and said, "Everyone, the divine beast has just appeared and I believe it must still be in 9 volts forest. Let's see who can find it first with our own abilities." As he spoke, he raised his head and laughed, then rode his flying sword to search the surroundings, When the others saw him leave, they were afraid that they would be left behind, so they quickly left and began searching the surroundings. When the people below saw them leave, they couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. There were actually 7 or 8 cultivators that appeared. One must know that they had only heard of cultivators in the past and never had the chance to see them. Now that they saw them, they were almost scared half to death. Seeing the 7 or 8 cultivators riding their flying swords, Feng Qingge's eyes were filled with yearning. She looked at Murong Yixian beside her and said softly, "Brother Murong, if there's a chance in the future, let's enter an immortal sect to cultivate together." "All right." Murong Yixian replied with a gentle voice, a faint smile on his handsome face. Hearing him nod in agreement, her heart was filled with sweetness. She asked softly, "Brother Murong, are we still looking for the divine beast? With those cultivators here, we have no chance. Even if we do find it, I'm afraid we'll be killed." "Then let's go back now." Hearing this, Murong Yixian glanced at her and said with a gentle voice, "You go back first. Let the Phoenix Guards escort you back. I still have to go to the mountain pass in the deepest part of 9 Volts Forest to help Elder Qin get the well mud. I'll go with you." She tugged on his sleeve and shook it gently. She said softly, "Brother Murong, I don't want to go back so quickly. I want to follow you. The depths of 9 Volts Forest aren't like here. Every 100 meters you go deeper, the danger you'll face is different. Especially the well at the mountain pass. It's said that very few people go there because there's a 3rd-rank high-level vicious beast guarding there. Be good, go home first. I'll go find you when I return." Hearing him say this, she knew that he wouldn't bring her along. She could only nod in response, "All right. I'll go home first. Remember to come find me when you return." "All right." He faintly smiled. After glancing at her, he picked out 10 people from the group he had brought and ordered, "You will follow and protect young Miss Feng back to the Feng Manor. If anything happens along the way, I will hold you responsible." "Yes." The 10 of them answered respectfully and walked behind the Phoenix Guards. When Feng Qingge heard his words, she felt a burst of sweetness in her heart. Only then did she reluctantly bid farewell to him and let the Feng Wei and the others escort her back first. It wasn't until Feng Qingge had gradually walked further and further away that the smile on Murong Yixian's face also faded away. His serene and calm gaze deeply looked at their departing figures, then he closed his eyes, concealing the contemplation and brilliance in his eyes. On the other side, Feng Zhou, who had heard the commotion behind him, jumped and rolled down the slope. He held the golden egg in his arms with one hand and pressed his body against the mud wall behind him. He tried his best to use the weeds in front of him to hide himself so that he wouldn't be discovered. In the span of a few breaths, a cultivator stepped on a flying device and flew across the sky. His eyes scanned the forest below, looking for suspicious things. Feng Zhou pressed against the mud wall and didn't move at all. He even held his breath. It wasn't until the figure in the air gradually disappeared that he let out a soft sigh. Phew! That was too dangerous. This egg is troublesome. Chapter 39. She reached out and knocked on the egg, only to hear a knocking sound. She thought, this egg can't be hidden. As soon as she meets someone, it will definitely be discovered. The people flying in the air are still looking for this egg, obviously they won't leave so soon. If she carries this egg to Guan Shilin, not to mention whether she can safely reach him, even if she does, she's afraid that she'll implicate him. What should I do? This is troublesome. She frowned, thinking of the contract method in her mind. Her eyes lit up, and she bit her finger and dripped a drop of blood on the egg. However, the drop of blood wasn't absorbed by the egg. Instead, it flowed down the egg. She widened her eyes. Didn't they say that an unborn beast can be contracted with a drop of blood? Are they lying? She didn't give up and squeezed 2 more drops of blood, but there was still no reaction. In the end, she could only give up. What's that sound? She tilted her head slightly and looked around. She heard a faint sound that seemed to be coming from underground. Sure enough, when she looked down, she saw that the soil seemed to be half turned up, and there seemed to be something drilling under the soil. A burrowing mouse. It can't be, right? Even a burrowing mouse isn't that big. She put the golden egg into her bosom and wanted to jump away from the turned ground and climb up a tree. However, as soon as she poked her head out, she saw a middle-aged man not far away flying towards her on a flying sword. She was so scared that she instinctively retreated. However, as she retreated, she stepped on the loose soil and lost her balance, falling into the hole under the loose soil. "Ah!" She cried out in alarm. She only felt her vision turn black, and her body slid down so fast that she didn't even have time to react. Above, just as the Fengjiu slid down, 2 burrowing mice poked their heads out from the ground. They squeaked a few times and looked around. Not long after, they dug up the soil again to fill up the exposed hole. The middle-aged man who came over on his flying sword looked around, but didn't see anyone here. He also didn't feel anyone's aura. He couldn't help but frown. Did I hear wrong? He scanned the area with his divine sense again and again, but didn't find anything. Only then did he leave on his flying sword. "Ah!" Underground, Fengjiu's scream echoed throughout the tunnel. Her body slid down, and she could not see anything in the darkness. She only knew that the tunnel was twisting left and right all the way down. Halfway down, she seemed to have kicked something fleshy. With a squeak, the fleshy thing rolled down with her. Bang! Hiss! Ah! She cried out in pain as her body slid forward. However, she didn't fall on the ground, but on the fleshy thing that had fallen first. Hiss! It hurt so much. As she slid all the way down, one could imagine the friction between her body and the burning pain all over her body. Even so, when she saw the pairs of green eyes around her in the dim light, she was so shocked that she quickly jumped up. Squeak, squeak. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Rats? Her scalp went numb. Judging from the sound, it was a rat, but the size that could be vaguely seen in the darkness didn't seem to be ordinary rats. Moreover, they were surrounding her at this moment. Thinking of the hole that was big enough to accommodate a person, and then thinking of the rats in front of her, her body tensed up. It's a burrowing mouse. Chapter 40. Squeak, squeak, squeak. There were about 45 earth-drilling mice around her, and every single one of them was terrifyingly large. Especially now that they were surrounding her, they were all staring at her and squeaking. With her strength, how was she going to resolve this predicament? Should she kill all 40 to 50 earth-drilling mice? These earth-drilling mice were clearly mutated, so it wouldn't be easy to deal with them. Just as she was thinking, she felt a gust of wind attack her. A earth-drilling mouse on the left squeaked and suddenly pounced on her. She endured the pain coming from all over her body and swept her gaze around. The dagger in her hand instantly swung out, and a faint crimson profound chi aura accompanied the dagger as it streaked through the air. With a whoosh, it pierced towards that earth-drilling mouse. It was also at this moment that the remaining 40 to 50 earth-drilling mice squeaked and suddenly pounced on her, surrounding her and tearing her apart. Hiss! The pain made her cry out in pain. The biting of 40 to 50 earth-drilling mice did not slow down the speed of the dagger in her hand. At this moment, she was like a killing god as she spun around and waved the dagger, stabbing and pulling it out. There was only one thought in her mind, and that was to survive. Squeak! Squeak, squeak. The number of earth-drilling mouse corpses on the ground increased, and the earth-drilling mice surrounding her no longer dared to approach her. This was because the corpses around her had already piled up into a small mountain, and the thick stench of blood permeated the pitch-black space. As for her, her body was dripping wet and warm. It was her blood, and also the blood of those earth-drilling mice. Come on. Don't dare to pounce on me anymore. Her voice was cold and evil, and her gaze was sharp and cold as it swept across the retreating earth-drilling mice. The bloodthirsty murderous aura and the fresh blood all over her body made her look like a killing god bathed in blood. Just her terrifying bloodthirsty aura alone was enough to make the remaining earth-drilling mice not dare to come forward. Don't dare. Ha! I haven't killed enough yet. As soon as her bloodthirsty voice fell, her figure moved, and the dagger with a cold glint and sharp aura once again pierced towards an earth-drilling mouse. Her speed was so fast that it simply did not allow it to dodge. Squeak! A mournful scream rang out, and a stream of blood splattered out. Another earth-drilling mouse died under her dagger. Creak, creak. The remaining dozen of them screamed and fled into the caves in panic. She pursed her lips and glanced at the caves. Then, she walked towards the direction where the breeze came from. Step by step, she left behind footprints. Every step left behind a drop of blood. After walking for nearly an hour, the first thing she heard was the sound of flowing water. Then, it was the gradually brightening light. Due to the flowing water, the air became a little more humid. At this moment, her entire body was in unbearable pain, but she still gritted her teeth and walked step by step until she arrived at the source of the flowing water. It was a deep pool. The bottom couldn't be seen, but it was extremely clear. The water was flowing, it was just that no one knew where it flowed to. However, there was no road in this area. The light was slanting down from above, as if they were at the bottom of a deep valley. The cliffs were covered in moss due to the gentle flow of water, and there were some vines hanging down from the surroundings. She retracted her gaze after a single glance. What she needed to do now was not to leave this place, but to heal her injuries. If he didn't treat the wounds caused by the burrowing rats, he was afraid that they would become infected. Fortunately, there was a deep pool here. Chapter 41. She narrowed her eyes and felt the bone-chilling coldness of the pool, as well as the waves of pain from her wounds. However, after the pain, she felt very comfortable, as if a warm current was brushing past her body. A warm current. She suddenly opened her eyes and looked at her body in the water. At this moment, she sensed a faint aura surging on the surface of the water. It wasn't mystical energy, but pure spiritual energy. Looking at the deep pool filled with faint spiritual energy, she thought of those mutated earth-drilling mice. Was it because of the spiritual energy in this deep pool that they became so plump? But how could there be such a pure spiritual energy here? Just as she was deep in thought, the golden egg placed on the side suddenly moved and rolled into the pool without any warning. Splash! With a splash, the golden egg quickly sank into the water. She was shocked and grabbed the Qianquan pouch and dagger placed on the side before quickly diving down. She opened her eyes in the water and saw the golden egg slowly sinking. However, the deeper she went, the deeper the clear pool became. It was as if it was a bottomless pit filled with mystery. She was worried that she wouldn't be able to hold her breath if she dived any deeper. She was also worried that she would encounter something at the bottom of the pool if she dived any deeper. Thus, she increased her speed and dived deeper. When she saw that she was getting closer, she reached out to grab the egg. However, just as she was about to swim up with the egg in her arms, she caught a glimpse of what seemed to be a stone door covered in moss at the bottom of the pool. Although she was puzzled, she wasn't curious at this moment because she couldn't hold her breath. She quickly held the egg with one hand and swam upwards with the other. However, at this moment, the door at the bottom suddenly creaked open slowly. A strong suction force came from the door, like a whirlpool at the bottom of a pool, sucking her and the water into the door. Under the strong suction force, she couldn't avoid being sucked into the whirlpool and into the door. However, under the pressure of the water and the suction force, she only felt the blood in her heart churn. She spat out a mouthful of blood, which landed on the golden egg in her arms. However, she didn't see the blood she spat out being absorbed by the golden egg before her vision turned black and she lost consciousness. It was also at this moment that a faint layer of golden light appeared on the golden egg. The complicated patterns that had disappeared on the eggshell reappeared and gradually extended outwards along with the golden light. The most unexpected thing was that the golden egg, which was originally the size of 2 fists, gradually grew bigger in the golden light. It was still in Fingzhou's arms, but at this moment, it was as big as a big watermelon. On the other hand, a crimson-red pattern of a flaming phoenix appeared between Fengzhou's brows, and her entire body was enveloped by a golden light. Moreover, the wounds on her body were healing at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. With a loud boom, Fengzhou, who had been sucked into the whirlpool, fell to the ground. The water in the whirlpool splashed onto her body. The gravity and pain gradually made her regain consciousness. When she slowly opened her eyes, she was blinded by the golden light. Ka-cha! The crisp cracking sound startled her. She just happened to see the golden egg in her hands become as big as a watermelon. There was even a crack on its surface. Ka-cha! Chapter 42. After the eggshell cracked open, what came out was not a little phoenix, but a naked child with his hands and feet together and his buttocks slightly raised. A faint golden light that contained a rich spiritual aura pervaded his body and gradually dissipated. As if he had just woken up, he raised his head slightly and opened his eyes that were as clear as water. He looked at the similarly naked Fengzhou in a daze. After a long while, he seemed to have reacted. Those pair of black eyes glared and 2 clusters of scarlet flames burned inside. He suddenly jumped up, one hand on his fleshy waist and the other pointing at Fengzhou on the ground. His tender voice was filled with disbelief and anger. "You woman! This noble one is an ancient divine phoenix. You actually imagined this noble one as a human brat. Even if he could transform into a human when he grew up in the future, he never thought that he would turn into a human brat when he came out of his shell. He was a little fire phoenix. A little fire phoenix. Because of the contract, the contractor's imagination of him before he was born could directly determine whether he would be born as a beast or a human. However, if he was born as a human, he would have to wait until he reached adulthood before he could transform into a phoenix. Who knew how long it would take for him to reach adulthood? Then before he reached adulthood, wouldn't he have to parade around like a little brat? The more he thought about it, the angrier and sadder he became. He wanted to cry but didn't want her to see him make a fool of himself. He could only fiercely glare at the main culprit. Fengzhou was dumbfounded. A little brat really hatched from this egg. All right. Actually, when she received the egg, she had imagined what the phoenix that hatched from this golden egg would look like. Then, she accidentally recalled the cute appearance of a chubby little brat. Right now, she saw this little brat with one hand on his fleshy waist and the other glaring at her. His bare little body and his little elephant trunk swayed in front of her. Her hands itched and she reached out to flick that little elephant trunk. "Ah! What are you doing?" A certain arrogant little fire phoenix finally remembered his bare appearance. His little darling being teased made him both embarrassed and angry. He hurriedly retreated a few steps and covered his body with both hands. You shameless woman!" He roared in anger and shame. His delicate little face was flushed red, but his young and tender voice didn't make his roar sound intimidating at all. At this time, as if he just saw her naked body, he quickly covered his eyes with one of his hands and turned around. You're not wearing clothes. This time, even his ears began to turn red. Feng Jiu glanced at the overreacting kid and continued to tease him, I can see your little butt. Aw. You shameless woman. Shameless, shameless. He was so anxious that he stomped his feet, but he didn't know how to scold her. All he could do was shout, shameless. Feng Jiu was amused and couldn't help but chuckle. At this moment, she lowered her head and noticed that all the wounds on her body had healed. A hint of surprise flashed through her deep eyes. Her eyes moved slightly as she thoughtfully looked at the little fire phoenix, who was now covering its little butt with both hands. Was it because of this little brat? She took out a piece of cloth from her universe bag and wrapped it around her chest. Then she took out a set of men's clothing and tied it with a belt. Only then did she reach out and hug the naked little brat. Aw. What do you want to do? Chapter 43. Who would have thought that Feng Jiu would take out a set of clothes from her heaven and earth pouch? Using a dagger, she changed it a bit and put it on the little guy. Just put up with it for a bit. When we get out, I'll buy you a red doodoo to wear. She said with a smile. As she spoke, she even slapped his chubby little butt. All right. She turned him around and looked at the angry little guy, feeling that it was very interesting. This senior won't wear that plaything. He muttered, looking at the woman who kept touching and slapping his body with annoyance. I thought that after the egg cracked open, a phoenix would come out. I never thought that it would turn into a little brat. AI, then will you become a phoenix? She asked curiously. It would have been better if she didn't mention it, but once she mentioned the arrogant little fire phoenix, he became angry. You still have the nerve to say that. This senior is an ancient divine beast, but this senior was born in the form of a human. This is all your fault. Feng Jiu rubbed her nose. How would I know that my random fantasy would come true? Humph. He gave a heavy snort. Crossing his arms in front of his chest, he angrily turned his head away, not looking at her. Feng Jiu smiled without caring. She stood up and looked around. I never thought that there would be a place like this at the bottom of the lake. Thinking about the suction force that pulled her in, her brows slightly knit together. I really don't know how such a woman became my contracted master. She's ugly, weak, and likes to touch people's butts. She's a completely perverted woman. At this time, the little fire phoenix was hugging the eggshells and eating them. As he ate, he muttered to himself. From time to time, he would throw a resentful look at Feng Jiu. Feng Jiu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She reached out and flicked his little head. Little guy, whether you're willing or not, you're already my person. From now on, you'll follow me. As she said this, she looked at him with a strange gaze. Also, are you that hungry? You can even eat those eggshells? Little fire phoenix rolled her eyes and turned her head away arrogantly, ignoring her. His eggshell was good stuff. Eating it could not only increase his strength, but it could also increase his body's nutrition. That woman didn't know anything. She was an idiot. All right, let's go. Let's see what's so special about this place that it has such a suction force that could suck us in, Feng Jiu said as he walked inside. It could be seen that this was a secret palace that had been abandoned for many years. However, it was unknown how this secret palace was not submerged by the water at the bottom of this deep pool. Little fire phoenix hugged the eggshell and ate as he followed behind her. From time to time, he would look at the figure in front of him. He felt that this woman was very strange. She was very weak, but she didn't panic even in such a place. I've waited for so many years, and finally, someone has come. The heavens haven't forsaken me, the heavens haven't forsaken me, ha 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 ha. Suddenly, a deep and arrogant voice came from the secret mansion. The excitement in the voice caused a powerful pressure to vibrate and reverberate in the air. What was strange was that she didn't feel the slightest discomfort when she saw the powerful pressure that was visible to the naked eye rippling in the air like water. Was it because she had contracted with the ancient mythological beast, the fire phoenix? Thinking of this, she couldn't help but look at the little guy behind her who was gnawing on the eggshell. Chapter 44. Why are you looking at me again? The little guy glared at her. Fengjiu smiled, then suddenly turned around and pinched his tender little face. What should I do if I like you more and more? Hearing this, the little fire phoenix's eyes widened in surprise. His delicate little face flushed red. He tried his best to look angry, but his expression was somewhat bashful, and his face was 3 parts shy and 7 parts uncomfortable. You don't think that I'll change my opinion of you just because you said that? You're an idiot. I won't like you. Also, don't touch me all the time. You're not like a woman at all. After saying that, he proudly looked away, not looking at her. Fengjiu smiled. She felt that this little brat's awkward and shy appearance was really cute. Little girl, come here, let me have a good look. That deep and arrogant voice resounded once more, and this time, it was accompanied by a suction force that sucked Fengjiu's entire body into it. Stupid woman. After eating the eggshell, the little fire phoenix was wiping his hands when he saw her being sucked in by a force. He couldn't help but cry out in alarm and quickly followed. Fengjiu only felt that she couldn't move, and couldn't even shout. In the blink of an eye, she was sucked in and arrived in front of a skeleton. In the next moment, a force invaded her meridians. She felt that under the invasion of that force, her whole body was exposed under the sun. There were no secrets to speak of. When the little fire phoenix caught up, he bumped into a layer of enchantment and was isolated outside. He couldn't get close to Fengjiu. Seeing her standing motionless in front of the skeleton, he panicked and shouted, "Stupid woman! Stupid woman, how are you? Profound spiritual body. It's actually a profound spiritual body. Ha 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 ha. I, Chu Batian, actually encountered a profound spiritual body that's hard to come by in 1,000 years. Ha ha ha. The heavens didn't abandon me, the heavens didn't abandon me. Ha 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 ha." Fengjiu could only hear the excited laughter. The force binding her was released, and she fell to the ground weakly, facing the skeleton in front of her. Fengjiu didn't feel any killing intent or malice, only the excited voice. Therefore, he wasn't worried. He turned to the little fire phoenix who was outside the bounded domain and said, "I'm fine. Don't worry." After all, the two of them had a soul contract. After the little fire phoenix calmed down and sensed that she was fine, he snorted and said uncomfortably, "Who's worried about you?" But his eyes still couldn't help but look inside the enchantment to check on her condition. Knowing that he was lying, Fengjiu did not mind. Instead, he focused on the skeleton in front of him and called out tentatively, "Senior." At this moment, a shadow appeared on the skeleton. A middle-aged man wearing a black robe floated in midair. He looked down at Fengjiu with a sharp and oppressive gaze. "You have a profound spiritual body. Little girl, you're not simple." Not only did she have a profound spiritual body that's hard to come by in 1,000 years, but she was also the contracted master of the ancient divine beast, the fire phoenix. How could such a little girl be ordinary? Chapter 45. Profound spiritual body. Fengjiu looked at the figure in astonishment and asked, "Is the profound spiritual body very rare?" Forgive her for not being in this world for long, and there were many things she did not know about cultivation. She had never heard of the profound spiritual body. The profound spiritual body is a cultivation genius. Not only can you cultivate Xian Qi, you can also cultivate spiritual Qi. Furthermore, your cultivation speed is 10 times faster than others. The middle-aged man looked at her with a smile and continued, in other words, if others take 10 years to cultivate to Xian Qi Martial Master, then you might be able to cultivate to the Martial Master level in a year. This kind of cultivation speed can be called a genius. Hearing this, Fengjiu was startled and said, that can't be right. I've tried to cultivate spiritual qi into my body, but I didn't feel any difference in my body. I didn't have the kind of cultivation speed that Senior described. She had spent a lot of time cultivating spiritual qi into her body. Furthermore, the Xian qi in her body was not enough. That's because the profound spiritual qi in your body has not been opened. He stared at her with a burning gaze. I hope that you will take me as your master. This way, I will open your profound spiritual qi and help you cultivate. If it was anyone else, hearing such a strong person say that he wanted to take them as his disciple, they would probably agree without hesitation. However, Fengjiu raised her eyebrows after hearing this. She looked at the old man and did not speak for a long time. You're not willing. Seeing that Fengjiu did not react with joy, he frowned and released his spiritual qi. However, he found that his spiritual qi did not have any effect on someone like her who had a contract with an ancient divine beast. He gave up and sighed. You don't have to worry about my motives. I only hope that after you become my disciple, you can help me with 3 things. Hearing this, Fengjiu thought for a while before saying, Senior, please tell me. If it is within my ability and does not go against my style of doing things, I can agree. Hearing this, the middle-aged man laughed loudly. Good. I see that you are also a casual person. Your temperament is somewhat similar to mine. Fengjiu smiled and said nothing. Little girl, I used to be the palace master of the Tianyuan Palace, Chu Batian. When I was in my prime, no one dared to oppose me. As long as I think it's right, I'll definitely do it. Back then. He told Fengjiu about his life in detail. Fengjiu also listened attentively. From his words, he knew that he was a willful person, but because he was too willful, he was regarded as an evil demon by the orthodox immortal sections. He had a treasured sword that could cut through iron as if it were mud, named Qingfeng. A righteous immortal had coveted his Qingfeng treasured sword and slandered him for massacring a mortal village, causing him to be hunted down by powerful cultivators from all over the world. As a martial emperor, he was not afraid of those cultivators who were weaker than him. However, they had captured his clansmen and threatened him. As a result, he had escaped with serious injuries and died in the end. For so many years, he had been waiting for a fated person to come here and receive his inheritance, rebuild the Tianyuan Palace for him, and fulfill his wish. The first thing is to rebuild the Tianyuan Palace. What about the second and third things? The second thing is to enter the 1,000-sword tomb and retrieve the Qingfeng sword. As for the third. Chapter 46. Hearing that the request was reasonable, Fengjiu nodded and asked with a smile, since it's an apprenticeship, is Senior only going to help me open my Xianling meridians? If there weren't any practical benefits, she would have been at a disadvantage. Ha ha ha, of course there's more than that. The middle-aged man laughed, looking at Fengjiu with admiration. Hearing this, she didn't say anything else. Instead, she knelt down and bowed. Master, please accept a bow from your disciple, Fengjiu. Saying so, she respectfully kowtowed. Good, 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 I, Chu Batian, finally have a disciple. Ha 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 ha. He laughed excitedly. Girl, take away the third brick on the left side of my skeleton. There's something I want to give you inside. Okay. Fengjiu replied and knocked on the third brick. It was indeed hollow. Using a dagger, she pried open the brick and took out a small wooden box. Master, why can't I open it? The small wooden box wasn't locked, but she couldn't open it. That's a seal I placed on it. Normal people wouldn't be able to open it. Chu Batian said with a smile. With a wave of his hand, a ray of light shone on the box. All right, take out the thing inside. Fengjiu opened the box again, but this time, it opened easily. However, there was only an inconspicuous ring with some embroidery on it. Frowning, she asked, Master, is this the treasure you were talking about? She took it out and looked at it, but couldn't see anything special about it. I really don't know where you came from. Haven't you heard of spatial rings? Chu Batian shook his head and laughed. Don't look down on this ring. It's not an ordinary spatial ring. Aside from being able to store things, it's a world of its own. Even living things can be placed inside. Also, the time when food is placed inside is still, so it won't spoil. It's that amazing. How did Master get such a treasure? This should be even more priceless than the Qingfeng sword. With something like this, who would want his Qingfeng sword? I got this spatial ring by chance. Back then, I only thought of it as an ordinary item, so I didn't know it was a spatial ring. After all, it's impossible to find a spatial ring in this place. It was only after I was heavily injured that I dripped a drop of my blood into the ring that I knew it was a spatial ring. Speaking up to here, he paused and continued, ever since I died, the soul contract with the ring's soul. You only need to drip a drop of blood to bind it, and you'll be able to enter it. There are all the treasures that I've collected in my life. These are all the treasures I've left for you. I can to myself to enter the spatial ring. She thought. Chu Batian's right. If I to Chu Batito the spatial ring to Batianen, to be to hide. Chu Batian didn't know what Chu Batian was thinking. If he knew, he would definitely be pissed to death. How could she only think of using such a treasure to hide? The owner of the spatial ring can enter it. However, there seems to be a barrier inside the ring. Back then, I was like a lamp that ran out of oil, so I couldn't figure it out. I only know that it can store living things. As for the rest, you'll have to slowly explore it in the future. Chapter 47. Hearing this, Fengjiu raised her head to look at him. Seeing that the shadow was gradually weakening, she stepped forward. She knew that this shadow was floating in the air because of the last strand of his essence blood and divine sense. Once that strand of essence blood and divine sense was exhausted, he would disappear from this world forever. Steady your mind and calm your heart. The process will be a little painful, but you must endure it. Chu Batian said in a low voice. Only then did he envelop her with the last of his essence blood. A visible light surged through Fengjiu's body, seeping into her meridians and expanding them. Pain. A heart-wrenching pain. All the meridians in her body were being forcefully expanded by a strong flow of energy. From small to large, it was as if they would explode at any time. The pain caused her to break out in a cold sweat. It was more unbearable than someone cutting her with a knife. But she clenched her teeth and didn't make a sound. Her hands were tightly clenched into fists, her nails piercing into her palms, causing traces of blood to seep out. Little Fire Phoenix, who was outside the enchantment, saw her pale face. It was a little worried and paced back and forth outside. It wanted to make a sound but was afraid of disturbing her. It could only watch her suffer the pain of her tendons expanding. About an hour later, the aura that had enveloped her finally dissipated, and she fell to the ground weakly, gasping for air. Seeing this, Little Fire Phoenix was a little anxious. He hurriedly shouted, "Stupid woman! How are you?" Fengjiu endured the weakness in her body and stood up. Looking at the shadow, she asked, "Master, how are you?" "I'm already an ancient person. I've been guarding the last of my essence blood and divine sense for a disciple like you. I have no regrets." Chu Batian looked at her and said, "Girl, before you're strong enough to protect yourself, you must remember to keep a low profile. Don't let anyone know that you have the profound spiritual body. Otherwise, you'll attract a fatal disaster. The world of cultivation is cruel. Even if you're a natural genius, you still have to grow up." "Yes, Master, I understand." She nodded as warmth flowed through her heart. "Master is unable to give you any pointers on cultivation. When you go back, carefully look at the cultivation methods in the space. In the future, I will find a master to give you some pointers. But you must remember, you must always be on guard against others. You must not let a second person know that you have a rare treasure." "Yes." She smiled. At this moment, she finally admitted that he was her master. "You won't be able to walk out of this deep pool. I'll send you all to the 1,000-sword tomb in the end. After you find the azure edge sword, don't easily show it to others. Otherwise, the azure edge sword will also bring you trouble." He warned again. "Master, after entering the 1,000-sword tomb, how can I find the Qingfeng sword?" "The 1,000-sword tomb is a place where swords are buried. However, not everyone who enters the 1,000-sword tomb will be able to find a suitable sword. Swords have spirituality and will choose their own masters. The azure edge sword is even more so." He paused for a moment before continuing, "However, you have a strand of my essence blood. This strand of essence blood can help you sense the location of the azure edge sword. However, whether or not you can obtain the azure edge sword's approval will depend on you. If you can't obtain the azure edge sword this time, in the future, you must take it out of the 1,000-sword tomb." "Yes." She responded and saw him wave his hand. The enchantment dissipated and the little fire phoenix ran in. Chapter 48. When Fengjiu regained her senses, she and little fire phoenix were already in the sword catacomb. As far as the eye could see, it was filled with swords, as well as the sharp sword aura in the air. She lowered her head to look at the little fellow who was tugging at the corner of her clothes, then opened her hand to reveal an unremarkable ring. She bit her finger and dripped a drop of blood on it. The originally embroidered ring flashed with light and actually returned to its original state, but it was still unremarkable. She put the ring on her finger and it automatically became compatible with her finger. She injected her divine sense into it and sure enough, it was as her master had said. There was a space inside with many spells and treasures. When she wanted to explore further, she found that she was blocked by a force. She stopped her senses and did not explore further. Instead, she looked at the mountain of swords and sighed, "We actually have to find the green edge sword among so many swords. Looks like it's not that easy. Even if we can't find the green edge sword, we can still find something else. There are many good swords in the sword catacomb." Little Fire Phoenix instinctively continued her words. However, when he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something. He glared at her and said arrogantly, "Don't think too much, I'm not thinking for you." All right. Fengjiu smiled and held his soft little chubby hand and walked inside. "Let's go. Since we're here, let's walk around. If we don't find a suitable sword in 6 hours, we'll be sent out. We have to hurry." Little Fire Phoenix groaned awkwardly when she held his hand, but he did not shake her hand off. Instead, he allowed her to lead him inside. The surrounding swords emitted sharp sword aura. They were all inserted into the ground, and some of the blades had already been embroidered. After walking for a while, she still could not sense the whereabouts of the green-edged sword. Thus, she wanted to try and see if it was really as her master had said, that swords choose their masters. She grabbed a sword and tried to pull it out. However, the sword was firmly inserted into the ground and did not move at all. She wanted to try again, but she felt a cold sword aura shoot out from the sword, causing her to immediately withdraw her hand. TSK, it's really amazing," she said curiously, and the light in her eyes grew brighter. "What's so amazing about it?" "The swords of the Sword Catacomb have always been like that." Little Fire Phoenix pursed his lips and looked up at this stupid woman who was completely like a layman. He frowned and said, "You're not really planning to slowly search here, are you?" Upon hearing this, Fengjiu was stunned. "What else?" Little Fire Phoenix looked at her with disdain. "You're really stupid." Being looked down upon, Fengjiu felt helpless. Who asked her to be so ignorant? Didn't that person leave you a strand of essence chi? Close your eyes and try to sense if there's any aura of the Azure Edge sword in the surroundings. Will this work? The little fellow raised his chin and said in a deep voice, "The Qingfeng sword is not an ordinary sword. Furthermore, you have a strand of its previous owner's blood essence. Of course you can sense its location. I'll give it a try." She did as she said. Fengjiu immediately closed her eyes and did not think about anything. She only quietly sensed the sword aura in the sword tomb. After about half an incense stick's time, she suddenly opened her eyes. Her eyes were filled with surprise. Chapter 49. She brought the little Fire Phoenix to the place where the Azure Edge sword's aura was emanating. It was a small mountain top, and there were all kinds of treasured swords on it. The Azure Edge sword was at the very top of the mountain top, and at this moment, there was a sharp sword aura floating on the sword, and a low sword hum entered her consciousness, causing her mind to tremble. "Is that the Azure Edge sword?" She stared at the sharp sword emitting a cold light at the top of the hill, and she felt her blood boiling. This feeling was very strange. Buzz! A sword hum was transmitted into her ears. Standing at the bottom of the hill, she saw the Azure Edge sword at the top of the hill vibrating. The sword hum was emitted from the sword's body, as if it was howling excitedly. The sword aura on the sword's body became sharper until the Azure Edge sword was pulled out with a whoosh, and slashed down at her from the top of the hill. The little Fire Phoenix was slightly surprised at this scene. A spirit sword would choose its master, but it was rare to see a spirit sword like this that didn't even need her to pull it out. He looked at her with a strange gaze, but he couldn't tell what was so special about her. Whoosh! The long sword fell to the ground, and the tip of the sword pierced into the ground, just right by Fengjiu's right hand. Fengjiu reached out and grasped the Azure Edge sword. He felt a strong vibration accompanied by a sword hum from the sword's body, reaching his soul. He used a little strength to pull the sword out. With a whoosh, the sword emitted a cold light, and the originally rusty treasured sword looked as if it was newly forged. Seeing the sword's body emitting a faint green light, and the 3 words engraved on the sword's body emitting a layer of cold light, she couldn't help but praise, "What a good sword." With a twist of her hand, she waved the sword, and the biting cold sword aura cut through the air, extremely sharp. Master must have never thought that the Azure Edge sword would choose me as its master. She smiled lightly, and put the Azure Edge sword into her interspatial ring. Only then did she realize that it hadn't even been 6 hours, and they still couldn't get out. "Since we can't get out now, why don't we find a place to sit for a while? It's a good opportunity for me to see what kind of books there are in the space." As she spoke, she led the little Fire Phoenix to a place where the sword chi wasn't so strong. Just as she was about to take out a book that could conceal one's aura from her space, she suddenly felt the little fellow's gaze on her face. She looked up and asked with a smile, "What's wrong?" Caught peeking, he quickly averted his gaze and averted his eyes in embarrassment, not daring to look at her. But he couldn't resist the curiosity in his heart, so he hesitated and asked, "Why are there so many scars on your face?" Now that he mentioned it, she remembered that she had been soaked in the water for a while. The medicine on her face had long been washed clean, revealing her scarred face. She reached out and touched her face. A bad woman took a knife and scratched my face. Her tone was a little careless, but the coldness in her eyes was hard to detect. Little Fire Phoenix frowned. Then you won't fight back. I can't beat her, she said with a smile. She thought to herself, she wasn't the same person back then. If it was her, she wouldn't have ended up in this state. That's why you don't believe me when I say you're weak. But that's fine, as long as this lord is strong, this lord will protect you in the future. Chapter 50. Hearing his words, Fengzhou's eyes carried a smile as she reached out to pinch his tender little face. Didn't you dislike me a lot? This sovereign does dislike you, but you're my person. This sovereign can bully you, but how could I let others bully you? The little fellow spoke in a spirited manner, but it was a pity that his tender voice was so soft that it didn't have any power at all. With your small body. She raised her eyebrows and revealed a light smile. You'll probably fall with a single push. Seeing that his strength was being doubted, he immediately stood up and loudly said, This sovereign is the ancient divine beast Flame Phoenix. Although I'm still in my infancy, this sovereign has received an ancient inheritance, so my strength is very strong. Good, good, good. Then tell me, what do you know? She lightly smiled, a bit disapproving. After all, he was just a 3-year-old little brat, how strong could he be? Don't look at this sovereign's child appearance, this sovereign's strength is even stronger than a nascent soul cultivator. If it wasn't for that person's divine sense restraining the secret palace, that barrier wouldn't have been able to stop this sovereign. The little fellow slightly raised his chin, looking at Fengzhou with an expression that said, I'm very strong. She couldn't help but slightly raise the corner of her lips as she looked at him with a gaze of worship. So you're actually this strong? Of course. His face was full of pride and his eyes were in high spirits. But no matter how strong you are, you're still only my contracted beast. I'm still your master. She smiled as she reminded him of the fact that he wanted to forget. Sure enough, she saw his entire body wilt as he looked at her with hidden bitterness. That's right, why don't you enter the space first? Otherwise, a little brat like you will definitely attract attention if you appear in the 9 volts forest. If those cultivators find out that you're the little fire phoenix, then it'll be terrible. Because when her master sent them over, he said that they would still appear in the 9 volts forest after leaving the sword tomb. Because they were originally under the 9 volts forest, he could only send them out of the water, but he couldn't send them out of the 9 volts forest. The little fire phoenix who originally wanted to refuse reluctantly nodded after hearing her words. Because her strength was too weak, and although he was strong, it would be troublesome if he went out and attracted attention. Good girl. Seeing him nod, Fengzhou picked him up and kissed him. Seeing his little face turn red and his shy expression, Fengzhou couldn't help but laugh. Fengzhou used his spiritual will and the little fire phoenix entered the space. 6 hours later, a vortex appeared in the sky above the sword tomb, and then she was sucked into it. Where is this? She looked at the place where she suddenly appeared. It seemed like she was still in the 9 volts forest, but there wasn't a single person in the surroundings. Not even a single beast could be seen. It was so quiet that it was somewhat terrifying. Furthermore, it was already night time. Phew! It's cold. She rubbed her arms and thought as she walked through the forest, I wonder if Guan Shilin is still waiting for me there. After walking for a while, they suddenly heard the sound of fighting. Fight? Her eyes flashed with surprise. She immediately held her breath and quietly searched for the voice. When he arrived behind a large tree and poked his head out to take a look, he couldn't help but blink his eyes in astonishment when he saw the familiar figure. Uncle. It was actually him again. Counting the previous 2 times, this was the 3rd time they met. She and he were indeed fated to meet 3 times in just a few days. Chapter 51. She watched from behind the tree and was surprised to find that he was holding a long sword that was 3 fingers wide. The sword was sharp and murderous, and his whole body was filled with a breath that was visible to the naked eye. It was not Xian Qi, but spiritual Qi. There was no doubt that he was a cultivator. However, there was something wrong with him now. Although he was trying his best to suppress it, what was the layer of white frost that condensed on his beard, eyebrows, and face if it was not frost? Frost? Why was there suddenly frost on his body? Ah! With a mournful scream, the last black-clothed man's chest was pierced by a cold sword. That black-clothed man half knelt down, blood flowing out of his mouth. His eyes were fixed on the last black-clothed man. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but no words came out. In the end, he fell down without even taking a breath. At this time, Ling Mohan's body was trembling slightly, as if he was frozen. He stood there quietly, like an ice sculpture. The cold air that permeated his body was like 1,000-year-old ice. She could feel the coldness even though she was hiding 10 meters away. Bang! He fell straight down, his body trembling on the ground and gradually curling into a ball. Not only that, the frost on his face seemed to be thicker and thicker. Seeing that the situation was not right, she quickly ran over. "Uncle! Uncle, what's wrong with you?" She came to his side and squatted down. She was about to help him up, but when she touched him, she felt a piercing cold. Hiss! It's so cold. She instinctively retracted her hand and looked at the person who opened his eyes and looked at her with some astonishment. Why was he so cold? If it went on like this, wouldn't he be frozen to death? He just looked at her and closed his eyes again. His lips were gradually turning purple. Seeing that his situation was not good, she gritted her teeth and endured the piercing cold. She checked his pulse and could not help but be shocked. This is 1,000-year-old cold poison. She opened her eyes wide in astonishment, somewhat incredible. There was a cold energy flowing through his meridians. It was this extremely cold energy flowing through his body that caused him to be like this. Moreover, this extremely cold energy was clearly a cold poison. Moreover, it was not an ordinary cold poison, but 1,000-year-old cold poison. Suddenly, he heard a faint sound of movement in the night, as well as a murderous aura. Judging from the movement, there were no less than 20 or 30 people. Her eyes turned cold as she calculated in her heart. Seeing that there was no place to hide, she injected her profound qi into her finger and pointed it at his fainting point. In the next moment, she used her divine thought to bring him into her space. The moment the two of them disappeared, 30 men in black surrounded them with swords in their hands. The leader frowned when he saw the dead men in black. His voice was gloomy and filled with hostility. His aura was still here just now. He couldn't have gone far when the frost poison flared up. Search. Yes. The black-robed men replied in unison. Then, they split into several groups and flew in different directions. At this time, in the space, little Fire Phoenix was glaring at Fengjiu angrily. She didn't expect that she would bring in a man who was emitting a bone-chilling aura. At this time, Fengjiu had no time to pay attention to him. He was busy using his qi to protect Ling Mohan's heart meridian. If his heart meridian was also frozen, then he would not be far from death. Chapter 52. At this time, Fengjiu's face was no longer as lazy as it usually was. She put one hand on his chest, and with a serious look in her eyes, she said firmly, "He helped me. I can't let him die." Little Fire Phoenix was stunned by her expression and could only ask in a small voice, "How do you want to save him? This 1,000-year cold poison is something that even I can't help with." "No, you can help." Fengjiu suddenly revealed a meaningful smile. Hearing this, Little Fire Phoenix blinked his eyes and was a little curious. Just as he was about to ask what she meant, she unbuttoned his clothes, revealing his chest that was suffused with white frost. She injected profound energy into her hands and pressed on the acupuncture points on his body. "Come here." She suddenly stopped and looked at Little Fire Phoenix. "Ah. What are you doing?" Although he didn't understand, Little Fire Phoenix still stood up and walked over to her side. Fengjiu gave him an unbelievably gentle smile, causing goosebumps to rise all over his body. But in the next moment, he let out a scream. "Ah! My hand! My hand is bleeding. You woman, what are you doing?" He looked at her angrily, his heart full of grievances. "Lend me some of your blood." "It's just a small wound, I won't need much blood." She pulled his little hand to Ling Mohan's lips and dripped the blood from her finger into his mouth. As soon as the blood of Fire Phoenix entered his mouth, the cold poison in his body gradually dissipated, as if it was being suppressed. His body surged with heat, and that heat eased his stiff body. His body, which was originally curled up into a ball, was no longer curled up. "Is this sovereign's blood that useful?" At this moment, he finally understood the meaning behind her previous words. Seeing that he had finally recovered, Fengjiu sighed and explained, "You are the ancient Fire Phoenix. Fire Phoenix's blood is the hottest, naturally it can suppress the cold poison in his body." As she spoke, she patted his little head and smiled. "Thank you so much. You helped me return the favor." "Humph." Little Fire Phoenix turned her face away awkwardly, but she was very happy because of her words. "How long do you plan to keep him here? What if he wakes up? There are people chasing after him outside." "I'll bring him out once those people are far away. His cold chi has been suppressed, so he should be waking up soon. With his ability, as long as he wakes up, he should be fine." Little Fire Phoenix didn't say anything else. And just as she said, Fengjiu brought him out and placed him on the grass after an hour. "Uncle, I've saved your life. I still have something to do, so I'll take my leave now." Seeing his eyelashes move slightly, she knew that he was about to wake up. She immediately used a strange footwork to rush into the forest. Not long after she left, Ling Mohan also woke up. The voice of the little beggar was still echoing in his mind. He looked at his recovered body in surprise, and felt that the cold had been suppressed. He was shocked and looked around, but the little beggar was nowhere to be seen. As for Fengjiu, she was worried that the blockhead Guan Shilin was still waiting for her there, so she rushed to the original place. When the sky was bright, she finally arrived under the big tree. Seeing that he was no longer there, she couldn't help but sigh in relief. "Looks like he's gone. That's good, I don't have to worry about him waiting here like a fool." Chapter 53. When she heard the sound, her expression changed slightly, and she immediately dashed in that direction. However, when she arrived and saw the scene, she was stunned. She only saw the man covered in blood fighting with a fierce tiger with his bare hands. His clothes were torn by the tiger's claws, and the scratches on his body were a ghastly sight, and around him, there were more than 10 Hui Lang corpses. Just when she was shocked that he could kill more than 10 Hui Lang alone and fight with a fierce tiger, she saw him clench his fist, and a surge of dark force filled his fist. With a loud bang, he sent the fierce tiger, which weighed hundreds of kilograms, flying. "Awo!" The fierce tiger screamed and fell heavily to the ground, rolling a few times. Even the sound of its head being broken could be heard. "Little brother." Guan Shilin, who turned around, cried out in surprise. He wiped the blood on his face and ran over excitedly. Little brother, I thought something happened to you. Be careful. Before he could finish his words, his expression changed. He cried out in alarm and threw himself at him, pushing him away forcefully with both hands. He was so fast that Fengzhou, who had turned around after sensing the danger behind her, couldn't dodge in time and was pushed to the ground. "Oh whoa!" Hiss. The fierce tiger's roar was accompanied by Guan Xilin's screams, "Little brother, run, run!" The sudden turn of events stunned Fengzhou. She looked at Guan Xilin, whose shoulder was bitten by the fierce tiger and was dripping with blood. Her eyes turned red, and she suddenly jumped up, pulled out her dagger, and rushed over. Damned beast! She pounced forward and grabbed the fierce tiger's fur, and the dagger in her hand pierced into its neck. "Oh whoa!" The fierce tiger screamed in pain, but it refused to let go of the person in its mouth. It wasn't until Fengzhou's dagger once again pierced into its head that the fierce tiger fell to the ground, twitching on the verge of death. "Guan Xilin. How are you, Guan Xilin?" She hurriedly pried open the web between his thumb and index finger and pulled him out. Looking at his shoulder that was bleeding profusely and his right arm that was hanging limply, her heart trembled slightly. Such an injury. His hand. Little brother, are you hurt?" he asked worriedly in a weak voice. Hearing his words, her heart clenched tightly. Her heart ached and her eyes became slightly hot. She could only take out medicine to stop the bleeding and sprinkle it on his wound while cursing. "Do you think your life is too long? Who asked you to save me? I could have avoided it, so why did you push me?" No one had ever stood in front of her without any regard for their own life, but he, this foolish blockhead, had done so. What an idiot! He was so stupid. But for the first time, a corner of her cold heart was shaken. A strange feeling made her heart ache, and her slightly hot eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of mist. She couldn't see his face clearly. I'm sorry. I was in a hurry and forgot." He pulled out a simple and honest smile. But because his injuries were too serious, his face was too pale, and his body was covered in blood, he looked like he could die at any time. Little brother, don't cry. I'm fine. I'm just a little tired. I want to sleep for a while." Chapter 54. The warm sunlight shone into the forest and onto Guan Xilin's face. He frowned slightly and moved the fingers on his left hand. After a while, he slowly opened his eyes and stared blankly at the sunlight that shone through the leaves above his head. "You're awake." The soft voice made Guan Xilin startled. "Little brother." He wanted to sit up, but the wound on his body was pulled and he gasped in pain. "You're still injured. Don't move." Fengzhou held him down and looked at him with a complicated gaze. "You don't even know my name. Why did you protect me with your life? Little brother, are you angry?" He looked at him nervously. "Answer me." Seeing his serious expression, he could only say, "I'm older than you, and you're my little brother. If there's any danger, of course I have to protect you." Fengzhou was slightly startled. He didn't expect such a simple reason. "Little brother. My name is Fengzhou." She suddenly opened her mouth and looked at his stunned face. "And I'm a girl." "Aw. www. This time he was so shocked that he stuttered. No matter how he looked at him, he didn't look like a girl. Which girl would dare to face a pack of wolves alone like him? Moreover, he always thought that he was him, and never thought that he was actually her. Looking at him stupidly, her eyes flashed. "The bone in your right shoulder was bitten off by that beast." "Oh." He glanced at her and replied. What I mean is, your right hand is crippled. This time, he paused and narrowed his eyes. Yes. Do you regret it? Hearing this, Guan Shilin looked at her, shook his head, and said seriously, I don't regret it. If I didn't block it and it bit you, you might not have survived. I'm a man, and I'm strong. It's just one arm, so it's fine. I can't hold a sword with my right hand, so I'll practice with my left hand. Hearing this, Fengjiu was startled for a long time. After a while, he revealed a smile. You really are an idiot. Little brother, no, Xiaojiu, I'm not stupid. I'm just more honest. He grinned and chuckled, not at all dispirited by his crippled right hand. Would an honest person say that he's honest? She raised her eyebrows and looked at him. She secretly decided that she would definitely cure his right hand. Xiaojiu, did you encounter any danger when you went to pick herbs? Why are you gone for so long? Thinking about how he had waited there for an entire day and night without seeing her return, he thought that she had encountered another ferocious beast, so he wanted to run over to look for her. Unexpectedly, he was besieged by wolves and tigers. There was an accident, and I was chased by 2 bears all over the forest. Are you hungry? I'll go hunt some wild animals nearby and roast them. She briefly explained, not intending to say much about what she had encountered in the past day and night. I'm hungry, but don't go too far. He said worriedly. Got it. She smiled, got up, and walked around. A few days later, in Jiufu Forest. During this period of time, the two of them had become closer. Knowing that Fengjiu was alone, Guan Shilin shouted that he wanted to acknowledge her as his sister. Fengjiu couldn't persuade him, and also felt that it was a good idea to acknowledge him as an older brother. Thus, the two of them performed a simple ceremony to confirm their sibling relationship. Chapter 55. Yes, sure. Let's leave this place first. For her, it didn't matter where she went. Thus, the two of them left without hesitation and headed towards Stone Forest Town. 2 days later, in Stone Forest Town. Guan Shilin's clothes were tattered and stained with blood. His handsome face was covered in black patches, and his muscular arms made him look like a savage. As for Fengjiu, his white clothes had turned gray, and his face was smeared with medicine. He looked dirty and messy, no different from a beggar. When the two of them entered Stone Forest Town, they naturally attracted a lot of disgusted gazes. Even the people who passed by them avoided them as much as possible to prevent them from bumping into them. The atmosphere in town is really different. Fengjiu took a deep breath. He could smell the fragrance of various snacks in the air. Xiaojiu, let's change our clothes first. Otherwise, the inns won't let us in. Guan Shilin said as he tugged at his tattered clothes. Okay, let's see if there are any ready-made clothing stores nearby. As she spoke, she looked around. Suddenly, her gaze fell on a certain spot. She pulled Guan Shilin over and said, over there. There's a shop over there. Wait. He hurriedly pulled her back and asked in a low voice, Xiaojiu, do we have money? How can we buy clothes if we don't have money? She was speechless when she heard this. How can we not have money? Don't worry, I have money. As she spoke, she waved the bag at her waist. Let's go. Let's not talk about 1 set, even 10 sets won't be a problem. After hearing that she had money, Guan Shilin grinned. The two of them walked towards the ready-made clothing store together. Bro, you should wear this. It suits you. She picked up a black robe. The quality was not bad, and she let him try it on. Okay, I'll take this one. He had no objections. He took the clothes and walked inside. Not long after, he finished changing and walked out. Seeing that she was picking out men's clothes, he said, "Xiaozhou, why are you picking men's clothes? We're back in town now. Don't wear men's clothes. Wear a dress. Girls should wear dresses to be beautiful." When he was in the family, the girls liked to wear dresses, and they would buy more than 10 sets at a time. Therefore, he thought that his sister should also wear dresses and not dress like a beggar. Men's clothes are more convenient. As she spoke, she was about to hand the selected men's clothing to the shopkeeper, but he pulled her to the women's clothing section and called the shopkeeper over. "Come, help me take this, and that one down for my sister." Seeing this, Feng Zhou didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but she gave up after thinking about it. Now that she was in town, she didn't have to wear beggar's clothes, so why not change back to women's clothes? "Give me those red sets," she said to the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper didn't expect this little beggar to be a girl, but he hurriedly took out the red dresses. "Do you have a veil? Give me a few more red veils." As she spoke, she picked out a few more sets for Guan Shilin. Then, she took out the money and said, "Bill. Xiaozhou, aren't you going to change?" She smiled and said, "You can change into a new one. Mine isn't torn, but it's a little dirty. Later, I'll find an inn to take a bath first. Otherwise, it won't be comfortable wearing new clothes." And that's true. He nodded and found an inn nearby with her. "Xiaozhou, go take a bath first. I'll guard the door for you." Outside the guest room, Guan Shilin took a step forward, intending to be the door god. Seeing his posture, Feng Zhou couldn't help but laugh. "No need. This is an inn. I can just close the door. There's no need for you to guard the door for me. You should go take a bath too. I'm hungry. Wait for us to go out and find food." As she spoke, she pushed him towards the next room. Hearing that she was hungry, Guan Shilin could only compromise. "Okay. Remember to close the door. I'll wait for you here after I'm done." She replied, then turned and entered the next room. She closed the door and walked into the inner room where the water was already prepared. Perhaps because it was his first time being someone's brother, Guan Shilin was very protective of Feng Zhou, especially after he found out that she was a girl. After a quick bath, he dressed and left the room. He stood guard outside the door of the next room, which attracted many strange looks from the guests passing by. Feng Zhou took a long time to take a bath. It took about an hour before the door opened from the inside. When Guan Shilin heard the door open behind him and turned around, his eyes couldn't help but widen. Shock and disbelief appeared on his face. "Xiaozhou." Feng Zhou replied. Under the red veil, the corners of her lips curled up slightly, and a smile bloomed on her face. Although her face was disfigured, her figure was excellent. Her exquisite and graceful curves matched with the dazzling red dress made her look like a dazzling sun. She was so beautiful that people couldn't look straight at her. Her face covered by the red veil added a layer of mystery to her. She exuded a mysterious aura that made people's hearts itch to catch a glimpse of the beauty's face, but they couldn't see her face under the veil. The red dress on her body was charming and enchanting, but also unrestrained. Her body exuded a cold and arrogant aura like a red plum blossom in the snow. She didn't have the gentleness of an ordinary woman in the boudoir. Instead, she had the innate noble aura of a superior. Looking at the beauty in red in front of him, Guan Shilin was speechless for a long time. He only felt that his little sister was unbelievably beautiful. Her soft black hair was draped over her back and was only loosely tied with a red ribbon. 2 strands of hair fell on her cheeks, adding to her charm and enchanting aura. Her eyes, which were exposed by the red veil, were half closed with a smile. Her eyebrows exuded confidence and arrogance, it was hard for him to associate her with the dirty little beggar that he had seen before. Xiaojiu, you're so beautiful. Even fairies aren't as beautiful as you, he grinned foolishly. Thinking that such a beautiful woman was his little sister, he suddenly felt an incomparable sense of pride. Let's go. She chuckled. She was in a good mood after changing into women's clothes, so she walked downstairs. Oh, okay. He hurriedly followed. As if he thought of something, he looked around. Sure enough, he saw that the men upstairs and downstairs were all staring at his little sister in amazement. Seeing this, while he felt proud, he also secretly made up his mind to help Xiaojiu get rid of the scar on her face. It wasn't until the two of them left the inn that the people in the inn came back to their senses. So beautiful. Who is that girl? When did such a stunning beauty come to our town? In the restaurant opposite the inn, Murong Yixian, who was standing by the window, looked at the red figure with confusion in his eyes. Chapter 56. Because of the doubts in his heart, he went downstairs and went in search of the red figure. On the other side, Feng Zhou and Guan Shilin found a restaurant and booked a private room. They ordered more than 10 dishes and 2 pots of wine, then closed the door and started eating. Feng Zhou put the veil aside and poured wine while saying, "Brother, let's stay here for a while. Later, we'll find a quiet courtyard to rent. It'll be more convenient than staying in an inn." "Okay, we'll look for one later." Guan Shilin had no objections to this. "Xiaojiu, don't just drink wine. Have a bowl of stewed soup first." He gave her a bowl of soup and scooped up a piece of egg fried meat for her. "Try it and see if it's good." "You eat. I'll do it myself." As she spoke, she saw that he wasn't used to using his right hand and couldn't hold the chopsticks properly. She put some of each dish into his bowl and said, "After a while, I'll raise my cultivation and find the medicine to cure your right hand." Hearing this, he was a little startled. "It can be cured. And, it's just that the things you need aren't easy to find." She drank a bowl of soup and ate some dishes. "But it won't be a problem. I'm 100% sure that I can make your hand recover to its original state." With her medical skills, as long as she had the medicine, there was no illness that couldn't be cured. Not to mention the tendons in his shoulder that were bitten off, even if his entire arm was bitten off, she could reattach it. Although he didn't regret his hand being crippled, hearing her say that it could be cured still made him very happy. "Xiaojiu, if my hand can be cured, then I'll work hard to cultivate in the future and protect you." "Okay." She nodded with a smile. She knew that his strength wasn't low. With his strength alone, he could deal with a pack of wolves and tigers. One could imagine how strong his explosive power was in a desperate situation. She also believed that he would become even stronger in the future. Downstairs, Murong Yixian sat at the table on the first floor and drank wine. His eyes were closed and he was deep in thought. He didn't know why he followed her, and he didn't know why he thought that the woman in red was Chinga. But when he glanced at her from upstairs, the back view was very similar. But he followed her all the way. He wasn't sure because the two people's temperaments were different. Chinga was gentle and soft, while the woman in red was unrestrained and flamboyant. Her red clothes were so dazzling on her. Although his Chinga was also very outstanding, she wasn't that kind of person, and she never wore red clothes. How could he suspect that the Chinga who had already returned was someone else? That familiarity in her every action and smile, it was clearly her. But there was a voice in his heart, he couldn't help but doubt. After a long while, when the door to the private room upstairs opened and the red figure appeared again, the shocked gazes of the diners upstairs and downstairs couldn't help but follow her closely. The veil that fluttered slightly as she walked made them wish that a gust of wind would blow the veil away. Murong Yixian raised his eyes and looked over, only to see the woman in red with an extremely outstanding temperament slowly walking down. Every step she took was calm and graceful. Her red clothes were like fire, like the sun, yet her body exuded a cold and indifferent aura that kept people away. Every movement she made naturally exuded the noble aura of a person in a superior position. Chapter 57. When she saw Murong Yixian, Fengjiu was a little surprised to see him here. Actually, she had already sensed that someone had been following them, but she didn't feel any malice, so she didn't pay attention to it. Thinking about it, the person who had been following them was him. However, wasn't he accompanying the fake Feng Qingge? Why was he here? And what was the meaning of the inquisitive look in his eyes? Under the veil, she revealed a playful smile. She calmly retracted her gaze and walked out. However, she hadn't taken a few steps when the person who had been sitting blocked her way. She didn't say anything, only raised her eyes to look at him. Murong Yixian didn't say anything either. He stood in front of her and quietly looked into her eyes, as if he wanted to find a trace of familiarity from the past in those eyes. However, he was disappointed. Although those eyes were very similar to hers, those wanton and flamboyant eyes were not hers. This pair of eyes was so beautiful, so similar to the person in his heart. However, his Song Qingge's eyes were gentle, but this pair of eyes in front of him hid a hidden sharpness. The two completely different auras made him unable to distinguish between them. "Boy, what are you doing?" Seeing that something was wrong, Guan Shilin stepped forward. His sturdy body blocked the two of them, cutting them off from looking at each other. Murong Yixian came back to his senses and looked at the tall and sturdy man in front of him. He revealed an elegant smile. "Brother, I just saw that this girl looks a little like a friend of mine, so I wanted to say hello." Perhaps it was his gentle and refined manner and noble aura that made Guan Shilin feel that he didn't seem like a bad person, so he was slightly puzzled and turned to look at the person behind him. "Miss, the peach blossoms in Peach Blossom Temple bloom in March." He quietly looked at her, his gaze so gentle that it seemed as if he could drown her in water. And this strange sentence made Guan Shilin a little confused, not knowing what it meant. Only Fengjiu's heart moved slightly. In his memory, there was such a warm face painting. "Brother Murong, I heard that the peach blossoms in Peach Blossom Temple are the most beautiful, with red and white contrasting against each other. The mountains and plains are endless, is that true?" Under the peach blossom tree, a beautiful young girl raised her head slightly. Her eyes were filled with deep affection as she looked at the man in white beside her. The white-robed man's eyes were filled with tenderness. He reached out to hug the young girl beside him and said gently, "Yes, there are endless peach blossoms in the Peach Blossom Nunnery. When the wind blows, the sky is filled with pink petals like a rain of flowers. When the peach blossoms bloom in March this year, I'll take you to see it. When the peach blossoms bloom in March of this year, I'll take you to see them." A hint of surprise flashed through her half-closed eyes. Her heart suddenly felt a kind of bitterness and pain. She knew that it was the original owner's deep affection for Murong Yixian. The person was right in front of him, and the words seemed to have been spoken yesterday, but the person had already disappeared between heaven and earth. Murong Yixian's heart tightened slightly. His serene gaze fell on her half-closed eyes, wanting to see the abnormality in her expression. "The peach blossoms in Peach Blossom Temple bloom in March. I'll take my sister to see it. Why would I need you to remind me?" Guan Shilin, who didn't know what he meant, said unhappily. He took Fengjiu's hand and strode out, exhorting, "Sister, let's ignore that pretty boy. That guy looks like a playboy. Peach blossoms bloom in March. I think he wants peach blossoms to bloom." Pfft. Chapter 58. To Fingzhou, Murong Yishuan was someone who cared deeply about Feng Qingge, but to Fingzhou, he was just a stranger. She would only rely on herself for what she wanted to do. Even if this person was one of Feng Qingge's most trusted people, she would not tell him the current situation. It was better to rely on oneself than to rely on others. Murong Yishuan stared blankly at the two figures as they left. Younger sister. That man said she was his younger sister? Then she was not Qingge. His heart suddenly felt empty. He was a little disappointed, but also a little relieved. Perhaps he was just overthinking everything. After all, his suspicions were so unbelievable. If his suspicions were true, wouldn't it mean that the Feng Qingge who had returned to Feng Mansion was a fake? Even if he had some doubts in his heart and felt that she was not the real Feng Qingge, how could her father and grandfather mistake her for someone else? Perhaps all of this was just him being paranoid. On the other side, Guan Xilin and Fingzhou looked at a few courtyards. Finally, they settled on a relatively quiet courtyard. Its location was relatively remote, but it was quiet and had a good environment. On the same day, the two of them bought some daily necessities and moved in. After informing Guan Xilin, she entered seclusion to practice. For 3 days, the tightly shut door was not opened. Guan Xilin, who was guarding the courtyard, had been practicing using his left hand to wield the sword during these 3 days. His talent was not bad, and his explosive power was also strong. Originally, his left hand was out of practice, but now, he was starting to get the hang of it. Although it was not as nimble as his right hand, he was gradually able to use his strength. In the room, Fingzhou, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, placed her hands flat on her knees. Her body was surrounded by a layer of red qi that was visible to the naked eye. The qi in her body was running extremely fast. It could almost be said that the qi quickly converged into the qi sea between her eyebrows and gradually gathered into a ball. When a beginner practitioner entered the warrior stage, they would need to practice for several years before they could break through to the initial stage of the Black Realm. Take Feng Qingge as an example. She was originally a level 2 martial artist. But now, in just 3 days, she had achieved the primary level of Qi C. Moreover, she had steadily entered the initial stage of the Black Realm. Her strength had soared. Warriors of the Black Realm already had some strength. For example, the middle-aged man at the martial master level she had met in the 9 Valleys forest was equivalent to the main pillar of a family. Moreover, he was only a martial master who had reached the mid-stage of the Black Realm. Back then, when the martial master was in the mid-stage of the Black Realm, he was no match for her, let alone now that she had cultivated the Qi C and entered the level 2 of the initial stage of the Black Realm. When she exhaled softly and slowly opened her eyes, little Fire Phoenix's surprised voice rang in her mind. "Stupid woman, the barrier in this space has been broken by this sovereign. Quickly come in and take a look." A trace of surprise flashed across her eyes, and with a thought, she flashed into the space. As soon as he entered, he couldn't help but be startled. "This is... How is it? Didn't I say that I'm very powerful? The barrier that the old man couldn't break was broken by me." Little Fire Phoenix looked at her with a smug face and said, "I don't know what kind of luck you have to be able to encounter such a rare space. If you practice here, 3 days outside is equivalent to 1 day inside." Chapter 59. She walked slowly inside and saw that the blue sky and white clouds were like a small world. When the space-bounded domain was not opened, she could only see it but could not cross it. But now it was different. Looking at the spiritual house of space, her mood couldn't help but soar. It was really a treasure. "Look, there's a spiritual spring here. I've seen it. The spiritual spring is nourished by the spiritual qi of this space, so the water has spiritual qi. Little Fire Phoenix was also very happy. After the barrier was broken, it had been celebrating for a while. It also liked this place from the bottom of its heart. Otherwise, it wouldn't have stayed here for so many years without shouting to go out. It must be known that if it cultivated here, its strength would definitely increase very quickly. She smiled and touched Little Fire Phoenix's head. Then you stay here and practice. I'll go out first. I'll come here to practice in the future. I'm sure my strength will increase very quickly. Got it. Little Fire Phoenix curled his lips and walked to the spiritual spring to play with the water. Fengjiu smiled when she saw this. With a thought, she flashed out of the room. When she opened the door, she saw Guan Xilin practicing his swordsmanship in the courtyard. She noticed that his left hand was a little stiff and not very flexible. Her heart skipped a beat and she called out, "Brother. Xiao Zhou, you're out. Why do you practice like you don't care about your life? You've locked yourself in here for 3 whole days." He put away his sword and walked towards her. He said seriously, "Xiao Zhou, practice is not a one-time thing. It's impossible to achieve anything in a short time. You have to do it step by step." Hearing this, Fengjiu couldn't help but smile. Yes, yes, yes. Although she had reached the initial stage of the Black Realm, she still suppressed her strength to the second stage of the Warrior Realm. Ordinary people couldn't see her true cultivation. To be able to advance so quickly in such a short period of time, it was naturally because of her profound spirit physique. Moreover, her profound spirit vein had been opened by her master. It was as if her meridians were originally small streams, but now they had become a torrential yellow river. Her cultivation speed naturally couldn't be compared to the past. "By the way, brother, I want to buy a set of silver needles. Come with me." "Alright, let's go now." After washing his face, he carried his sword and went out with her. When they walked into Zhenbao Pavilion, Fengjiu knew that they were being watched. The other party was so good at hiding their presence that even Guan Xilin didn't notice it. If it wasn't for the fact that she was an expert in this field, she probably wouldn't have noticed that they were being watched. "Shopkeeper, do you have a complete set of silver needles?" "Yes, I do. May I know what grade you are looking for?" "We have 3 types of needles, which are divided into 3 grades, high, medium, and low. The prices are different, and the quality is also different." The shopkeeper introduced with a smile and took out 3 sets of silver needles and placed them in front of Fengjiu. "This one." She chose the most expensive set because it was more complete in length and was of good quality. Her eyes fell on a sword sheath hanging on the wall. Her eyes lit up and she asked, "Is that sword sheath for sale?" The shopkeeper followed her gaze and smiled. "You have good taste. This is the one and only sword sheath in Zhenbao Pavilion. It can be said that you can't find another sword sheath like it in the entire country of glory." Chapter 60. She took the sword sheath and looked at it, then said, "Bill please." The shopkeeper smiled and invited her to the counter, then said with a smile, "Miss, the 7-star sword sheath is 1,200,000 yuan, and the set of silver needles is 35,000 yuan. I'll only charge you 1,230,000 yuan for these 2 items. Take the last 5,000 yuan as a discount. I hope you'll come again next time." After Fengjiu paid the bill, she put the 7-star sword sheath and the silver needles into her Qianquan bag, then left with Guan Xilin. Seeing her use her Qianquan bag, the shopkeeper was surprised. Qianquan bag. It seemed that the girl's family background was not ordinary. That's right, otherwise, how could she buy the 7-star sword sheath for millions of yuan without even bargaining? The two bought a lot of things outside and went back after a whole day of shopping. The people who were watching them watched them enter a remote courtyard, then one of them left to report. In an inn, a middle-aged man was sitting cross-legged in cultivation. When he heard a low call from outside, he said, "Come in." A man quickly walked in, bowed respectfully, and said, "Second master, this subordinate has been following those two people for an entire day. I saw them enter a relatively remote courtyard." This subordinate inquired around and found out that they moved in 3 days ago. They claimed to be brother and sister. Also, when we were in the treasure pavilion today, the bag that the woman in red took out was the young master's chinkun bag. The middle-aged man's eyes were full of murderous intent, and he said in a gloomy voice, "A pair of brother and sister. Describe their figures and appearances to me in detail." Yes. He described the figures and appearances of the two people, and finally said, "But the girl in red covered her face with a veil, so I couldn't see her face clearly." The middle-aged man's eyes were gloomy, and one of his hands was hanging by his side, while the other hand was clenched so tightly that blue veins appeared and made cracking sounds. Draw a picture of the girl in red and send it to the Black Market Mercenary Mission Board. Also, tell the Black Market people where they are staying. Tell them that I want to see the girl's head the next morning. Yes. The man respectfully answered and quickly left. It was night. The night sky was pitch black, as if it was shrouded in dark clouds. Not a single star could be seen. Dressed in red, Fengjiu was lying on the roof with one hand resting on his head and the other looking at the chinkun pouch in his hand. He muttered, "So there's a soul imprint inside. No wonder I was targeted even though I changed from a beggar to a woman's outfit." Keeping the chinkun pouch, she looked at the pitch-black night sky and sighed, "This feeling. Why is it so good? It's a dark and windy night, a night for murder." There was a hint of laziness in his nonchalant tone, as well as a hint of imperceptible anticipation. As the night deepened, Fengjiu yawned on the roof, feeling a little drowsy. Until the second half of the night, Yunyang shyly peeked out from behind the dark clouds like a young girl, sprinkling the bright moonlight on the ground, for black silhouettes holding long swords rushed over with a cold murderous aura. They quickly arrived outside the courtyard and leaped up. Just as they were about to jump into the courtyard, they were startled by a voice. "I've been waiting for you for most of the day." When the sleepy and lazy voice came, the 4 black-clothed mercenaries instinctively looked in the direction of the voice. Chapter 61. After being stunned for a moment, the 4 black market mercenaries revealed lustful expressions. "That's her. I didn't expect her to be even more enchanting and beautiful in person. That's right. It would be a pity to kill her like this. Why don't we?" Another person rubbed his chin and chuckled. His ferocious gaze impudently sized up the enchanting figure in red. Even though they felt that the red-clothed woman was extremely stunning under the moonlight, and even though the other two were also itching with lust, they were even more cautious than the other two. Especially when they saw her calm and graceful appearance, they felt that it was even more strange. A mercenary with a hideous scar on his face warned in a gloomy voice, "This woman is a bit strange. Don't let your guard down. It's better to just kill her and be done with it. She's just a woman." "Number 3, you think too highly of her," one of the mercenaries said disdainfully. Looking at the enchanting woman in red fluttering in the night wind, he chuckled, "Just a woman like her. I can handle her myself." He stepped on the roof tiles with the tip of his foot and jumped to the opposite side. "It would be a pity to kill her. Let's have some fun first." He smiled evilly, leaned forward, and reached out his hand to grab the front of Fengjiu's clothes as she sat lazily on the roof. At that moment, a cold glint flashed in Fengjiu's narrowed eyes. She instantly reached out and grabbed the other party's outstretched wrist. Then, she forcefully bent her hand down. Crack! Hiss! The sound of bones breaking was accompanied by a mournful scream that pierced through the night sky, breaking the silence of the night. Almost at the same time, Fengzhou, who was originally sitting, used the force to stand up. He lifted his foot and kicked fiercely. Using his profound energy, the tip of his foot accurately kicked the other's crotch. And he couldn't make a sound. There was only a muffled groan as his body curled up in pain. His trembling legs made him kneel down with a plop. Just this bit of strength. She snorted coldly and released the hand that was holding his bowl. Instead, she grabbed his throat and broke his neck with a crack. She threw his body into the courtyard. Number 2. Several cries of surprise rang out. The three of them looked angrily at Fengzhou. They were shocked by how swift her movements were. She was so fast that they didn't even have time to react. They could only watch as she killed their second brother. Kill her. The older man's sinister voice was filled with ferocious hostility. As soon as his voice fell, he gathered his energy and leaped onto the opposite roof. The long sword in his hand carried a profound energy aura as it fiercely attacked. Warriors in the mid-stage of the Black Realm. She raised her eyebrows slightly. She did not think much of their strength. Her hand moved, and the sharp dagger in her hand glowed with a cold, bloodthirsty light. She suddenly leaned forward, and when the tip of the sword was 3 inches away, she dodged to the side and raised the dagger in her hand. A muffled groan was heard, and the eyes of the mercenary beside her suddenly widened. His body stiffened, and he fell straight to the ground. The murderous aura emanating from the woman was even more intense than the black market mercenaries, causing them to feel fear in their hearts. Run. Chapter 62. Fengzhou's lips curled into an evil smile when he saw the figure running away. Since you've come, don't even think about going back alive. As soon as her voice fell, a red figure flashed out and swept towards the two men like a ghost in the night. The dagger in her hand reflected a bloodthirsty cold light in the night. In the next moment, her figure swept past the two men, and blood splashed out. The two men who were running away instantly froze and fell straight into the courtyard. Bang, bang. There were no signs of fighting, and no one was alerted. The 4 black market mercenaries died quietly at her hands. Fengzhou stood against the wind and squinted at the 4 corpses in the courtyard. His eyes moved slightly. In addition to practicing dark force, a profound warrior also needed martial arts techniques. Only by combining the two could a profound warrior's strength be unleashed. Her chi had already reached the initial stage of the Black Realm. Plus, she was good at assassination and fighting. Dealing with these profound warriors in this small town was not a problem. However, if she left this town, she would need to improve her strength again. Otherwise, if she met someone stronger than her one day, she would only be at their mercy. Jumping into the courtyard, she walked over to the corpses and rummaged through them. She only found the same black card on each of them. On it were the words, Black Market Mercenaries. Black Market. She murmured in a low voice, searching for information about the black market in her mind. However, Fengqingge obviously did not come into contact with this kind of thing in the past. There was very little information about the black market in her mind. It seems that I need to go take a look at the black market. She smiled and took out the medicinal liquid she had concocted in the afternoon from the space and sprinkled it on the 4 corpses. With a sizzling sound, the 4 corpses emitted white bubbles and light smoke and quickly turned into a pool of blood. Only the wrinkled black clothes were left there. The next day, Guan Shilin rubbed his neck and walked out. He wondered why he had slept so soundly last night. When he looked up, he saw Fengzhou practicing soft fist techniques in the courtyard. He couldn't help but grin. Xiaozhou, this fist technique isn't supposed to be practiced like this. As he spoke, he came to her side and steadily got into a horse stance. Look, when you're boxing, you have to be steady. You have to clench your fists tightly and punch with force. You have to shout out loud so that all the strength in your body will be channeled into your fists. Only then will your fists be powerful. If you're like you'll be knocked down with one punch. At this moment, he seemed to have forgotten how fearless she was when she faced the wolf pack alone, and how ruthless she was when she reaped lives like an Azura. He only remembered that she was a girl, a 15-year-old girl. Even if she had a fierce and strong side, in his heart, she was just a little sister that needed his protection. Hearing his words, Fengjiu couldn't help but laugh. Brother, that fist technique of yours is for a man to practice. It uses strength. My fist technique uses borrowed force to counter force. It uses 4 tails to lift 1,000 caddies. As she spoke, she seemed to remember something and asked, Brother, I remember you said that you're practicing your Guan family's technique, right? That's right, it's the Guan family's technique. Xiao Zhou, do you want to learn it? Brother will teach you. She smiled and shook her head. No, I have a scroll that's very suitable for you to practice. She handed him the universe pouch that had already been removed from her soul imprint. Chapter 63. Xiao Zhou, you're giving me the entire Qinquan bag. What about you? Guan Shilin opened the Qinquan bag and saw that other than a scroll with the flaming dragon tiger technique written on it, there were also many valuables and some bottles. He could not help but ask, why are you giving me so many things? He took out the scroll and his eyes widened. Heaven level mental cultivation technique. I'm not mistaken, am I? Even the glorious Sun royal family would not be able to take out a scroll like this. One had to know that heaven-level mental cultivation techniques were the rarest of the rarest. It was impossible to find a scroll in a small 9th-grade country like the glorious Sun Kingdom. Then, where did she get it? For a moment, the hand holding the mental cultivation technique trembled. He was excited, but it also burned his hand. He was actually lucky enough to see a heaven-level mental cultivation technique. It was unbelievable. That's right, it's a heaven-level mental cultivation technique. This mental cultivation technique is also used to cultivate strength. It's just right for you. She smiled and said, your hand is unable to practice martial arts or swordsmanship now. Don't practice it for now. Use this time to memorize the mental cultivation technique. I'll give you a heaven-level martial technique after that. This mental cultivation technique was naturally found among the things her master gave her. Last night, she felt that this mental cultivation technique was suitable for him, so she took it out. I can really practice it. He looked at her with sparkling eyes. Of course. She nodded. If there's anything you don't understand, you can ask me. All right, then I'll go back to my room to practice the mental cultivation technique. He felt a little light with the mental cultivation technique in hand and could not wait to go back to his room to practice. Fengjiu smiled when he saw this. He practiced Tai Chi for a while to loosen up his muscles and bones before returning to his room to practice. For the next few nights, mercenaries from the black market would visit their little courtyard almost every night. However, none of them returned. And Guan Shilin knew nothing about all this. Because Fengjiu would use silver needles to loosen up the veins in his right hand every night. Finally, he would hit his acupuncture point to make him sleep until dawn. A few days later, Fengjiu set up a maze formation in the courtyard. After giving instructions to Guan Shilin, he left for the black market. At the same time, the middle-aged man who had been waiting at the inn for several days without any news got up with a gloomy face and walked towards the black market while cursing, useless trash. You can't even handle a woman. When he cursed, it was obvious that he had forgotten the fact that he was no match for Fengjiu. The black market was an underground trading house. Not only were there rare and precious medicinal herbs, but there were also medicinal pills, weapons, and other things that cultivators needed. In the black market, there were martial arts arenas. Martial arts arenas were used as battle arenas. Martial arts arenas were used to earn money and become famous. On the other hand, the mercenaries were ferocious outlaws. They weren't recognized by the regular mercenary guilds. In the black market, some of them were alone, while others were in groups of 3 to 5. The missions they took were assassination missions that regular mercenaries wouldn't do. Here, they only recognized money and sold their lives for money. When the man in a dazzling red robe walked into the black market, many people's eyes couldn't hide the amazement in them. The man was tall and slender, exuding a demonic aura. His exquisite golden mask had an enchanting red datura flower blooming on it. His face couldn't be seen, but there was a hazy sense of mystery about him. More importantly, no one could see through his cultivation. How could someone who dared to walk into the black market so openly be an ordinary person without cultivation? Since he wasn't an ordinary person, there was only one possibility left. Chapter 64. Under everyone's curious gazes, an old man in gray walked forward with a smile and bowed. "Greetings, Your Excellency. I am the deputy manager here. My surname is Xu. How may I be of service to Your Excellency?" After looking around, Fingzhou looked at the manager in front of him and said, "Give me a private room where I can watch the battle in the arena." Hearing this, the assistant manager smiled and said, "Sir, please follow me. The arena is just ahead." He led the way and brought Fingzhou to the private room on the second floor of the arena. "Sir, please take a look and see if you are satisfied." He opened the window and stepped aside. Fingzhou walked forward and saw that there was a rectangular arena below. Other than the rows of seats on the first floor, the second floor was filled with private rooms. The 2 floors could hold almost 1,000 people. At this moment, there were 2 ancient martial art practitioners fighting in the arena. The scene was very intense and the cheers of the audience were louder than the other. "We are a branch city and only have one arena. Therefore, there is only one Huang ranking here. If you come to Yunhua City one day, you can come to the main city of our black market to take a look. Only the main city has the Xian, Di, and Tian ranking lists." Seeing that Fingzhou did not say anything, the manager smiled and said, "If you are interested, you can also bet on the winner. The odds are 1 to 10. After looking at it for a while, Feng Nine withdrew her gaze with interest. She looked at the steward beside her and asked, "Do you have an inspector here?" The manager was stunned for a moment and then nodded. "Yes, what do you want to test?" "Medicine." Hearing this, the steward's face became a bit more serious. "Your Excellency, please wait for a moment. This old man will go and ask the inspector to come over." After saying that, he bowed and left. The moment he closed the door, the manager looked back at the room thoughtfully and then left quickly. After about half an incense stick's worth of time, Manager Zhu came back with 2 old men. After entering the door, he introduced them to Fingzhou with a smile. "Your Excellency, this is the manager of our black market. His surname is Dong, and this is our pharmacist, Elder Deng." The 2 men who entered the room quietly sized up the people in the room. Dressed in red, he was sitting by the window with one hand supporting his head as he looked at the arena below. His golden mask had an enchanting hell flower blooming on it. His entire person was filled with a kind of evil and charming aura, but this aura also had an unattainable noble aura, which made people feel reverence for him involuntarily. When he heard the sound and looked back, his eyes were as deep as a bottomless abyss, with 3 parts laziness and 7 parts sharpness. Just by looking at him face to face, the 2 of them knew that this red-clothed man was not simple. Greetings, Your Excellency. May I know what kind of medicine Your Excellency wants to test? Medicine was something that only pharmacists could concoct. Not to mention their small town, it was rare even in Yunhua City. Therefore, when he heard that someone wanted to test a medicine, he hurried over. Feng Zhou glanced at them, then took out a bottle from her sleeve and handed it to Manager Zhu. Her languid voice sounded out unhurriedly. This is a bottle of qi-gathering liquid. It can allow a person who has exhausted his xian energy to instantly explode with 3 times his usual strength. It can be maintained for an hour. Chapter 65. Can this really make a person who has exhausted his qi instantly recover and unleash 3 times his strength? Even Elder Deng's voice was trembling. He stepped forward and took the potion. His heart was filled with incredible excitement. Feng Zhou didn't say anything because she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure walking below from the corner of her eye. Wasn't that the person she was looking for? Her lips curled up slightly and a strange smile flashed across her eyes. She watched him sit down in the front row and call over a man from the black market. She didn't know what they were talking about. The attention of the 3 people in the room was currently focused on the bottle of medicine. The 2 managers watched as Elder Deng opened the bottle cap and sniffed the medicine inside. However, they saw that he didn't do anything for a long time. Manager Dong couldn't help but call out, "Elder Deng." Elder Deng smiled bitterly and looked at the 2 managers and Feng Zhou who was leaning on the windowsill. He said, "I'm really ashamed. Although I'm a drug tester, I've never tested such a potion." What he meant was that he couldn't test whether Feng Zhou was telling the truth. Hearing this, the 2 managers couldn't help but be stunned. They had never encountered such a situation. Who do you think will win, the girl or the big man? Feng Zhou's voice suddenly came, startling the 3 people in the room. Hearing this, the few of them walked up to the arena on the first floor to take a look. They saw a 16 or 17-year-old girl fighting against a burly man. However, she was not a match for the burly man. At this time, she was already beaten to the point of death, but she still stubbornly tried to stand up. Manager Zhu glanced down and said, "She's only a level 6 martial artist, but her opponent is a level 2 initial stage warrior of the Black Realm. Of course, the big man will win. Moreover, it's obvious that he's exhausted and can't fight anymore." Feng Zhou smiled and shook her head. "No, she'll win." Her eyes fell on the girl who was still eager to fight. She said, "Take the potion down and let her drink it. Then the test results will come out." The eyes of the 3 people in the room lit up. That's right. This method was simple and direct. This way, they would be able to know if this medicinal liquid was really as miraculous as he said. Moreover, this medicinal liquid was drunk by the young girl in the arena who was unable to continue fighting. If she really won, it would be a living advertisement. "I'll take it downstairs." As Manager Zhu spoke, he took the bottle of medicine and hurried downstairs, heading towards the Colosseum on the first floor. Colosseum, ha 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 ha, little girl, you should just admit defeat. Even if you cultivate for another 10 years, you won't be Laozi's opponent. Thinking of the 10 times the money he had won from him, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. The young girl spat out a mouthful of blood. She felt as if she had been run over by a carriage. She was in so much pain that she couldn't feel anything. She couldn't even muster a trace of strength. But she was unwilling to lose like this, unwilling to lose like this. He clenched his teeth and forced himself to stand up, but he fell back down again, causing the spectators to burst into laughter. Admit defeat. Next match, next match. Don't waste our time. Someone was already yelling impatiently. At this moment, Manager Zhu came to the young girl's side with the medicinal liquid. No one knew what he said to her, but the young girl took the bottle and drank the liquid without hesitation. Just as everyone was wondering what Manager Zhu did, they saw a faint red aura of rich dark force surging from the young girl's body. Chapter 66. All the spectators in the martial arts arena cried out in disbelief. Many of them stood up in shock as they looked at the young lady whose entire body was surging with profound energy. That profound energy aura that was visible to the naked eye couldn't be faked. The grandeur that she was emitting was even more real. However, just a moment ago, she was clearly unable to stand up, but in the next moment, her entire body was surging with profound energy that was even denser than before. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they wouldn't have believed it. At this moment, in the martial arts arena, the young lady's eyes were filled with shock, surprise, and excitement. Both her hands were tightly clenched into fists. When she felt the profound energy within her fists, she abruptly raised her eyes to look at the startled man. The outcome hasn't been decided yet. As soon as her voice fell, her entire body exploded with a speed that was 3 times faster than usual as she swung her fist and struck out. On top of her fist, the surging profound energy aura formed an air wave that produced a whooshing sound. Under the man's incredulous gaze, the punch sent him flying 10 meters away. The strength of the punch and the ferocity of the grandeur made the spectators in the arena suck in a breath of cold air. The atmosphere froze for a moment, as if it couldn't recover from the shock. It wasn't until after a long while that the thousands of spectators in the martial arts arena stood up as thunderous applause and cheers reverberated throughout the arena. Compared to the spectators in the arena, Manager Zhu was even more excited. He glanced at the martial arts arena where the outcome was about to be decided, then quickly walked back. Regardless of whether it was the audience on the first floor or those in the VIP rooms on the second floor, all of them revealed a thoughtful expression when they saw Manager Zhu quickly leave. Each of them summoned their attendants and asked them to inquire about what exactly was in that bottle of liquid just now. Compared to the excitement downstairs, Fengjiu, who was in the room upstairs, appeared to be very calm. Because the outcome was within her expectations, she didn't feel surprised at all. With the young lady's tenacious fighting spirit that refused to admit defeat, it would be strange if she couldn't win with the assistance of that medicine. Compared to her calmness, Elder Deng and Manager Dong were so excited that their faces flushed red. Their gazes towards Fengjiu were filled with an astonishing light, as if they had discovered a huge treasure. That kind of excitement, that kind of agitation. "Sir, how much more of that medicine do you have? How would you like to trade with us?" After Steward Dong came back to his senses, even the way he addressed her changed, and his attitude became even better. One had to know that such a miraculous medicinal liquid would definitely cause a commotion in the black market of Yunhua City. After all, such a potion had never been seen in a small 9th-grade country like theirs. If he had a bottle of such a potion, it would be equivalent to having an extra life-saving talisman on his body. Even if he encountered a strong enemy that he couldn't defeat, he could still use it to escape. How could he not be moved? Was this medicine refined by your highness? Could it be that your excellency is an alchemist? Elder Deng looked at Fengjiu with bright eyes full of worship and excitement. Hearing this, Fengjiu glanced at him and said in a lazy and cold voice, "I don't think I need to tell you who I am, right?" Realizing that he had crossed the line, Elder Deng quickly lowered his head and bowed. "Master, please don't take offense. I was just too excited and lost my sense of propriety." Chapter 67. After glancing at the two of them, she said, "I still have 2 bottles of medicine here, but I only plan to sell them at the auction price. Also, you cannot reveal any information about me." Hearing that there were 2 bottles, Manager Dong's eyes lit up and he smiled. "Although this is the black market, without your permission, we will not leak any information about you. You can rest assured. Fengjiu nodded and said, also, I need you to help me find a few spiritual medicines. She paused and said, when the time comes, I will give you a bottle of qi-gathering liquid as a thank you gift. Of course, the price of the spiritual medicines will be calculated separately. I will not treat you unfairly. Hearing this, the two's eyes lit up and they hurriedly asked what spiritual medicines it was. Finally, Fengjiu asked them to bring a pen and paper. She wrote down the spiritual medicines she needed and handed it to them. Sir, if he finds the spiritual medicines, how do we inform you? Manager Dong asked. Fengjiu glanced at him, I will come again in a few days. You don't have to worry about this. She brushed her red clothes and stood up. Leaving the 2 bottles of medicine behind, she walked out. Sir, please wait. Manager Dong called out and hurriedly came to his side and handed over a token. This is the black token of our black market. It is a representation of our noble status. Please accept it. Hearing this, Fengjiu reached out and took it. She kept it in her sleeve and then walked away. Seeing this, the 2 hurriedly sent her off after keeping the medicine. When they walked out, they saw Manager Zhu walking back with a smile on his face. Greetings, sir. Manager Zhu hurriedly bowed. He was about to speak when he was stopped by a raised hand. You don't have to send me off. I will walk around by myself. She stopped them from sending her off and walked forward. The 3 watched the red figure disappear around the corner. Only then did they withdraw their gazes. They gestured and returned to the room. Just now, many people have asked me what was in the bottle. Manager Zhu said excitedly, although they did not say it explicitly, they are probably guessing that it is a medicine. After all, only medicine can have such amazing effects. Don't leak any information about that person. Just keep it a secret and report it to the higher-ups. Steward Dong said in a deep voice. Should we send a few people to follow them? No. Steward Dong shook his head. We still don't know the depth of his strength, but this person cannot be offended. If we send someone to follow him, I'm afraid he will be displeased. At that time, the gains will not make up for the losses. At this moment, Elder Deng, who had been silent all this while, suddenly spoke. I'm afraid that the spiritual herbs on the list are not easy to find. What do you mean? Manager Dong looked at him. Because he wasn't very familiar with medicinal herbs, he naturally didn't know the uses of the spirit herbs on the list. These are extremely rare in the country of Blazing Sunday. I'm afraid we'll have to collect them from other countries. He looked at the 2 of them, his gaze glowing with vigor. I can conclude that this one is definitely an alchemist. There's even a high possibility that he's an alchemist. What? The 2 of them exclaimed, alchemist. Was it possible for such a noble existence to exist? Judging from his voice, he should still be very young. How could he be an alchemist? One must know that an alchemist's existence was above that of an alchemist. Not to mention a small grade 9 country, even a grade 6 country might not be able to find an alchemist. Chapter 68. I didn't expect her bounty to be in the top 3. TSK, what a surprise. Just as he was thinking, he suddenly heard a conversation. How did the woman in the portrait get into the top 3? Her bounty is 500,000. You just came back, so you don't know. No mercenary dares to take on this mission now. Why is that? Because every mercenary who took on this mission didn't come back alive. In less than half a month, many mercenaries have been killed by this woman. While the 2 of them were discussing, they looked at the man in red standing in front of the list and were a little surprised. One of them asked, Sir, are you going to give us a mission? After all, only the black market mercenaries could accept the missions on the list. Fengjiu looked back at the two men and shook his head with a smile. From the corner of his eye, he saw that the middle-aged man had already walked out, so he followed suit. After he left, the black market mercenary lowered his voice and said, "That man seems to be here for the first time. His aura is very intimidating. I wonder where he's from." "Don't care where he's from. Let's go, I'll treat you to a drink." The other man clapped his hands and walked out. The middle-aged man who was walking towards the inn suddenly stopped and looked back. He couldn't help but frown. He quickened his pace and turned into an alley. He stopped and shouted, "Who's there? Come out." A red figure walked out slowly and gracefully. She was still dressed in a dazzling red robe. Her black hair was tied up with a red ribbon. The only difference was that she was wearing a golden devil's snare mask with a blooming hell flower on it. Looking at the person who walked out slowly, his eyes narrowed. A guess flashed through his mind, but he quickly denied it. No, it shouldn't be that woman. The man in red in front of him was taller than the woman. It shouldn't be her. It's been a long time. Fengjiu's voice was lazy, with a trace of ridicule, coldness, and a trace of killing intent. "It's you." After hearing that familiar voice, his expression changed slightly, and even his voice trembled a little. It was an instinctive fear that made him take 2 steps back immediately. His body tensed up as he prepared to defend himself. Before he even made a move, he was already drenched in cold sweat. It was no wonder that a martial master like him would be afraid of a martial artist like her. It was because he had fought with her before and knew how powerful she was. When he thought about how he had almost died at her hands and how his hand had been crippled by her, he could not help but feel a sense of fear in his heart. This was also the reason why he did not dare to deal with her directly when he went to the black market to kill her. Seeing his reaction, Fengjiu couldn't help but chuckle. "Since you're so afraid of me, why do you still want to kill me?" She slowly walked forward, step by step. "I had almost forgotten that there was someone like you. Who would have thought that you would appear in front of me again?" As soon as she finished speaking, she heard movement behind her. She raised her eyebrows and looked back. She didn't know when a middle-aged man and an old man had appeared behind her. Their auras were vigorous, and their eyes were sharp. A powerful pressure was released from their bodies, and their killing intent overflowed, filling the alley. "Ha ha ha. You want to kill me? That depends on whether you have the ability." The middle-aged man's previous panic and fear disappeared, and his eyes were filled with excitement as he looked at the two people. Chapter 69. Elders. Her eyes flickered as she used her divine sense to investigate. These two were already at the martial master realm, so it was no wonder that they could silently appear behind her. Unlike the middle-aged man who was confident in his victory, the Great Elder and the Fourth Elder were sizing up the red-robed Fengjiu. If someone hadn't pointed it out, they wouldn't have been able to tell that the man in men's clothing was actually a woman. Even the two who had seen much of the world couldn't help but admit that this person had an androgynous aura. Unfathomable. With their strength, how could they not see through her cultivation? If this wasn't unfathomable, then what was? Ever since they came out, they had not seen her show any signs of panic. Even at this moment, her lips that were exposed outside of the mask were still holding a trace of a sinister smile, causing them to involuntarily become more cautious in their hearts. "Who are you? Why do you want to make an enemy out of our Sioux family?" The Great Elder asked in a deep voice, his sharp gaze fixed on the red figure in front of him. Fengjiu glanced at the Great Elder, her voice carrying a bit of surprise. "Make an enemy out of you? It can't be, right? You've always been my enemy. When have I ever taken the initiative to find fault with you?" Her voice paused as she glanced at the middle-aged man in front of her with a smile that wasn't a smile. If it wasn't for your second master running to the black market to place a bounty on my head, why would I go looking for him? Even so, you've killed our Sioux family's young master and crippled second master's arm. This is undeniable. Oh. So you're saying that if you want to kill me, I can only stretch my neck out for you to kill? She raised her eyebrows. The smile on her lips was still there, but her eyes were cold. The great elder's face sank as he sneered. Then it can only be said that you've provoked someone you shouldn't have. Our Sioux family is 100-year-old family. How could you provoke us? If you know what's good for you, you'd best surrender, or else. Or else. She hooked the corners of her lips into a wanton smile as she asked with interest, or else what? Kill me. Or else, I'll bring your head back to report. The great elder's cold voice fell, and his fingers clawed out. It was obvious that he had practiced the grappling technique to the point of perfection. Then let me properly deal with you. She sneered, and her figure instantly moved to meet them. The great elder's hand was filled with profound energy as he grabbed her wrist and tried to twist it backwards, but who would have thought that she would instantly break free like an agile snake? His hand was pulled forward by the great elder, and his lower body was attacked. He only felt a force being released from her hand, and his entire body was lifted up and thrown out by her. He regained his balance and landed on the ground. His face darkened. You do have some skills. Unfortunately, you're going to die here today. It is quite a pity. She nodded in agreement and looked at him with pity and sympathy, as if she was certain that the person who would die would be the first elder. Her pitiful and sympathetic gaze made the great elder angry. He pulled out his sword and pointed it at her, shouting angrily, "Arrogant child! You will pay a painful price for your arrogance. Your head. This old man will take it." The tip of the sword pointed forward, and a strong profound energy gushed out from his body like a tide, gathering on the edge of the sword. In an instant, a sharp sword aura filled with cold killing intent shot out. He moved forward in an instant, and with a terrifying killing intent, he attacked the red figure at a speed that was too fast for the ears to cover. Clang! A long sword that was suffused with a green light blocked in front of him. The two swords were against each other, and the sharp sword aura did not give way to each other. At the same time, there were several gasps and cries of surprise. Chapter 70. Crack. Clang. A cracking sound was heard. The great elder widened his eyes in shock. He stared at the sharp sword in her hand which was glowing with a green light, then looked at the crack on his own sword. His heart sank. In the next moment, the long sword in his hand was broken by his opponent's sword aura and fell to the ground with a clang. At the same time, he was sent flying by the terrifying sword aura before he could retreat in time. Hiss! Ah! He lost his balance and stumbled backwards. Fortunately, the fourth elder caught him and prevented him from falling to the ground in a sorry state. How can this be? How can it be the emerald-edged sword? He stared in disbelief at the treasured sword in her hand which was glowing with a green light. The green light on the blade was so dazzling. In the entire world, only the emerald-edged sword had its own green light. He was not the only one. The fourth elder and the second master of the Sioux family were equally shocked. However, aside from being shocked, they were also filled with greed. Greed for the treasured sword. The emerald-edged sword was a treasure amongst swords. The emerald-edged sword, which had disappeared for so many years, had finally seen the light of day again. Furthermore, they had encountered it. How could they not be excited? How could they not be greedy and want to take it for themselves? The emerald-edged sword pointed diagonally to the ground. The green light faintly floated and her red robes fluttered in the wind. A bloodthirsty aura filled the air from her body. She looked at the shocked and greedy trio, and the corners of her lips curled up slightly, revealing an evil and cold smile. Anyone who sees this sword of mine must die. As soon as she finished speaking, the red figure shot out like a demon. However, she did not charge towards the Great Elder and the Fourth Elder. Instead, she turned around and raised the emerald-edged sword in her hand. A swift and fierce sword aura sliced through the air. Hiss! The second master of the Sioux family was caught off guard and his throat was slit. Because he was caught off guard and because he did not have time to dodge. Even in death, his eyes were wide open in disbelief. Even in death, he could not take a single breath because his heart was filled with unwillingness. Second master. The Great Elder and the Fourth Elder cried out in alarm as they watched the figure stiffly fall down. In the blink of an eye, a life disappeared before their eyes just like that. Moreover, because her sword was too fast, the blood at his throat did not seep out for a moment. It was only when he fell and pulled at the fatal wound on his neck that scarlet blood spurted out like a blood fountain and dyed the ground red. That was the brother that the patriarch valued the most. Now that he was dead as well, they were truly unable to imagine how furious the patriarch would be when they returned. Seeing the expressions on their faces, Fengzhou chuckled. Do you think you can go back alive? From the moment she took out the azure-edged sword, she had no intention of letting the three of them leave alive. This alley would be the place where their lives would end. His half-squinted eyes flashed with a cold light, and his killing intent overflowed. The red figure also swept towards the two people. The green sword in his hand moved slightly, and the biting cold sword aura turned into a sword blade that swept out. Kill her! The two of them roared angrily. The Great Elder waved his broken sword and charged forward. The Fourth Elder also drew his sword and attacked from all sides. The two of them worked together, and the aura of a martial master at the peak of the martial master realm immediately filled the alley, causing the atmosphere in the air to congeal and become oppressive. Clang! Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh! As the swords and blades clashed, the sharp air currents and clanging sounds could be heard from time to time. What made the two of them aghast was the bloodthirsty killing intent and her crafty and fatal attacks. They were somewhat overwhelmed and panicked. Chapter 71. With a cry of alarm, Fourth Elder, who had been pushed back, was unable to stop it in time. He could only watch helplessly as Great Elder's broken sword was sent flying. The green-edged sword, which was glowing with a green light, pierced his chest with a whoosh. He could even see Great Elder's look of disbelief in that instant. He was so dissatisfied and so astonished. It was as if he could not believe that he had died at the hands of someone whom he had looked down upon. Seeing the Great Elder's body twitch as he fell to the ground, his eyes wide open in death, his heart trembled. He looked at the woman in the red dress and saw that she had pulled out her sword and was looking at him. Almost at that moment, he instinctively wanted to run. Yes, run. That was the only thought in his mind. His body instinctively reacted to run away. However, just as he moved, a ghostly voice rang in his ears. I've said it before. Anyone who has seen the green-edged sword must die. Once the cold and bloodthirsty voice rang out, her red robes flashed and blocked Fourth Elder's path. She looked at the pale-faced man with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Where do you think you're running to? Ah! He cried out loudly and raised the long sword in his hand. After injecting his profound energy into it, he fiercely slashed it towards her. With nowhere to run, he could only fight to the death. Even though he had been shocked by her strange skills during their previous exchange, he had no other choice now. For the sake of survival, he released all the profound energy in his body. The aura of a martial master at the full circle of the martial master surged, causing the dust and sand on the ground to swirl up. I don't believe that I, a martial master at the full circle, would lose to a damned girl like you. He cried out fiercely. The profound energy in his entire body surged and raised his speed to the maximum. As he rushed forward, his figure was as fast as a whirlwind and as fierce as a tiger. Seeing this, Fingyo also released all the profound energy in her body. Her advantage was not her profound energy, but the green-edged sword in her hand and her crafty, fatal attacks. She did not intend to compete with him in terms of profound strength. What she wanted to do was to kill him in the shortest amount of time. Otherwise, the commotion here would quickly attract some cultivators. At that time, it would be difficult to escape. The red figure flashed out. Borrowing the ferocity of the green-edged sword, every strike of her sword was a fatal killing move. Her movements were fast and ruthless. Even if the fourth elder was on guard, he could not block the green-edged sword intent and her fatal attacks. Time to end this. She held the sword with both hands, and in the instant that he was pushed back, she poured her profound energy into the green-edged sword, and with a quick and ruthless strike, she fiercely chopped down on him. The fourth elder instinctively tried to block the attack with his sword, but, clang! Hiss! A blood-curdling scream pierced through the air, and the sword in the fourth elder's hand was broken by Fingyo, and his entire body was cleaved into two halves, falling to the ground. Fingyo's gaze swept across the three corpses on the ground, and the green-edged sword in her hand picked up the chinkuan bags on their waists. Gathering her strength, she leapt into the air, flipped over the small alleyway, and quickly left. Just as she left, many cultivators rushed into the small alleyway. They had heard the commotion, but when they entered the small alleyway and saw the bloody scene inside, their expressions changed greatly. Some of them could not help but vomit on the spot. Killing people was just a matter of nodding their heads to the ground, but the scene inside was far too bloody, and they could not bear to see it. The three dead people were all martial masters. A bold older cultivator examined the three dead people, and when he found out their ranks, he was extremely shocked. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.